Welcome. Welcome to the Easter Fixe of the Austrian Central Bank. My name is Birgit Niesner. I'm the Director of the Economics Department. It's a big pleasure to have you here and have many participants online. By the way, also the keynote speaker, who I'll come to in a few minutes. The reason why we are here today is this report. 2022 on the car industry in CESEE countries. And this is definitely a report still worth reading because it deals with the success story of Eastern Europe, where part of its convergence story is due to its integration into an automotive cluster. But now it seems that we need an update to the entire growth model in these countries. And already in 2022, one sentence was very prophetic, and that's the real reason why we are here, not to discuss auto again, but it already said, as a last sentence in the summary, executive summary, it is also important to focus attention on other promising sectors and industries of the future. And that's what we are going to do today on the basis of wonderful studies and with a rich panel and range of speakers. So why do we need this update to the entire growth model in CESEE countries? Maybe you have heard about the smile curve. The smile curve is formed like a smile, and it means that the value added you can earn for your economy varies on the stage of the production you're in. Unfortunately, in the middle of the curve, smile goes down. In the production phase, the value added to be gained is the lowest, and that's exactly the risk which we want to point out for these Eastern European economies, that they are factory economies. And in order to move to higher grade and more sophisticated production with a higher value added, it will be important to find new sectors, to find new products. So that's the leitmotif of today's papers and today's speakers. And you will get a lot of interesting insights how to get out of this so-called functional specialization trap, which are the new star performers among the sectors. And we will even go on product level in one study to point out the products of the future of our geographic neighborhood. So we need a smart specialization approach, and we will give a lot of color to this thesis today. Apart from the smile curve, where CESEE countries are in the unfavorable part, I and we have three reasons to smile today. The first one is that this is not a one-off workshop, but it's an ongoing research project. There is already a website where you can find 2 papers, and new papers will be added. So stay tuned. This is something where we look into the future. The second reason for me to smile is that this is again a wonderful proof of our cooperation with the European Investment Bank. Matteo, thank you for being here with us. And with the WIW, there are several researchers here. I just mentioned Robert Sterer. So the Austrian Central Bank is proud to cooperate with those 2 institutions and really building a hub of excellent research on the region. And the third reason for me smiling here is Jerome Zettelmeier. Maybe we can already see him if the colleagues from the technical side allow us. Jerome, I will not introduce him because then we would spend the next 2 hours here. Hi, Jerome. Nice to see you. Let me just say that he's now the director of the renowned Bruegel Institute, Research Institute in Brussels. He has an enormously rich vita, and he has had exposure also to our region when he was working at the EBRD. And I'm especially grateful for him because he jumped in a few days ago. So that's why he is with us online. But as I know, Jerome, he's such an energetic speaker that it will now feel as if he were with us in the same room. Jeremy, the floor is yours, and then we'll end his round with a session of Q&A. I sit down and listen to you as well.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Birgit. Congratulations on your report on the car industry, which comes at a very propitious time. And more generally, congratulations on what is apparently the 92nd Jour Fixe. This is unbelievable. 92. So it just confirms the Austrian National Bank's role as a real center of excellence on thinking on European integration, and particularly on East-West integration, where you have been at the forefront since certainly since I was at ABRD, which was began in 2008, and then I moved on in 2014. Great. So I will now, with apologies, I will not talk about Central and Eastern Europe. I will talk about the EU. So this will be an EU level talk. It's an adaptation of a talk that I gave about a week ago at the beginning of the Bruegel annual meetings, which is sort of our annual flagship event. And this year of annual flagship event was dedicated to the publication of a volume that we do every 5 years called Memos to the EU Leadership. And so it's essentially a big picture summary of what we are worried about over the next 5 years for the EU as a whole, and what we recommend doing about it. Now, I understand, of course, this particular Jour Fixe is particularly interested in the competitiveness and growth angles, and we are also particularly concerned by those. And so I will cover those. And then I wanted, as a sort of bonus, give you sort of a one slide at the end on how our recommendations at Bruegel relate to those of the Draghi report, which was published on Monday, of course. Many of you will already have read it, at least part A. I have only read part A, but part A is very extensive and dense. Some of you may not have read it, in which case this might also be useful to you. So let me try and share my screen. I don't have many slides. I think I have 7 in total or so. Let's see if this works. So you probably see the you don't see the presenter view, right? So let me try this. How does this look? Do you see the presenter view, or do you see like the notes? Is this fine? This is fine?
Yes.
Okay, great, wonderful. Okay, great. So this is joint work with my colleagues Maria de Merzis and André Shapir here at Bruegel. And it draws on a set of about, almost 20 short pieces, but this is sort of the overview piece. So I'll give you something about today's challenges. I'll give you sort of a way of thinking about how to address the challenges. I will give you a sort of a one slide with an overview of recommendations, and then I will say something about the Draghi report. So the way I at least think about it is, by the way, these are all sort of personal views. We don't have an institutional Bruegel view. Is that the challenges that the EU faces are to some extent familiar. So they're not that different from the challenges that we were facing in 2019, which for us is the natural reference point, because that's sort of the last time we did this exercise. It's the last time that a new commission was inaugurated. We do this essentially in the gap between the European elections and the naming of the new commission. And the idea of these memos is that they sort of help stimulate the discussion, particularly ahead of the ratification of the new commissioners at the European Parliament, right? So sometimes these memos are cited in the hearings. That is, we sort of try to shape policy by sort of coming in at the right time. So what are those challenges? So the number one problem, I think, is still growth. And by the way, I view growth and competitiveness as largely synonymous, maybe not completely synonymous, but almost synonymous. And so the baseline problem in the EU, which we have had, since I would say the mid-90s, is comparatively low productivity growth. And so that was clear in 2019, but it is now exacerbated by 4 things that weren't there in 2019, or at least they were not as present. One is most obviously a very large and persistent terms of trade shock. So these are the high energy prices that we got in 2020, beginning in 2021, and then particularly after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Second, we have competitiveness challenges in export markets, and those also were there to some extent, but they have been greatly exacerbated by the growth of China in the same markets. Essentially, we are now export competing with China to a much greater degree than we were even 5 years ago. A third problem that you haven't discovered yet, but it will come. It must come. Maybe in some countries it has already started. Is a medium-term fiscal drag. So, fiscal policy, as you know, has erred on the expansionary side, at least since COVID, maybe even before, and for the most part for good reason. So we can argue with some of the composition of the spending. We can argue whether it went too far, but these were crisis times where we needed to rely on fiscal instruments to some extent. This tide has now turned. We have a new set of EU fiscal rules in place. I think it's important that these rules are followed and become a success. And I think that at this point, a majority in the Council would agree with that. And if they are followed, then it does mean that about half of EU countries will be on a pretty tough consolidation course, in the order of something like 0.5% of GDP per year over the next 4 to 7 years, right? Some less, a few even more. And that's going to produce basically a growth-reducing impact, unless, of course, it is offset by the ECB. And at this point, the ECB is in a position to offset it because it has, again, room for interest rate policy. The final point, which was already there in 2019, but it's now closer and more dramatic, is our long-term adverse demographics. And that is practically universal to all EU countries and beyond, right? It's particularly dramatic, even more dramatic in China. The second big challenge in the EU is decarbonization. And so again, we had this problem even in 2019. It was the problem that we're trying to solve with the EU Green Deal. But it is now exacerbated by the fact that our fiscal space has shrunk. Our political space has shrunk, meaning that we have a much more polarized electorate with, I would say, about 1/3 of the political spectrum saying that we're going too far in the speed of decarbonization, and maybe we don't need it at all. So we have the far right represented to a much greater extent, both in national and in the European Parliament. And at the same time, the urgency has gone up. So we have made significant progress in the EU. The US has made significant progress, and so have a bunch of other industrial countries, but emerging markets, not so great. China, actually, one of those that are at the forefront, that are doing relatively well, but at the same time, they're growing very fast, and so is India. And so the global carbon budget is vanishing, and there's an increased need to curb emissions growth, not just in the EU, but particularly outside the EU. The third challenge that is probably most on your minds if you come from Central and Eastern Europe is security. And so again, there was a baseline problem, I would say, since the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea. We have known that there was a threat. We have not acted on this threat. And now it is obviously exacerbated by a much more acute threat level from Russia, and also by a much greater sense of economic insecurity. So the economic security angle, I would say, comes from two directions. One is, again, Russia. So this was the experience of being overly energy dependent on Russia, which hit us in 2022 in the form of this huge spike in energy prices. But it's also a China issue, and increasingly a China issue. China has been harassing many of its trading partners when they didn't do or say something that China liked. And so this comes on top of the experience of the COVID port closures, which of course were not China's fault. I mean, they were ordered by China, but they were a reaction to the pandemic, and the disruptions that followed have had an important role to play in the transmission of inflation, for example, right? So we have really felt, in a sense, fragilities through trade, and we are worried that these might be abused in the future. I don't want to dwell on this slide. This is more of a Brussels slide, but this is sort of backwards looking. So how have we actually performed given these challenges in the last 5 years? And the bottom line is that it's a mixed record, but it's actually not a bad record. So we have shown coherence, speed, and even solidarity in the face of crises. So that was true for the COVID response, with some wobbles. After some wobbles, we had a common procurement. We kept the borders largely open, and of course, most importantly, we had this enormous common investment and spending plan, the Next Generation EU funds, which was basically broke through a previous red line. And whatever you think about its efficiency and its ultimately success in spurring reform, it was very instrumental in controlling the crisis at the time. We've had a fair amount of legislation at the EU level that recognizes and starts to address the longer term challenges. So it's not that the Commission sort of forgot about these challenges because it was busy firefighting. So there was very fundamental climate legislation, there was fundamental digital regulation. Some argue that we have gone too far in regulating, but there are also very important pro-competitive elements in this regulation, particularly the Digital Markets Act. The Commission did wake up to the economic security threats faced by the EU quite early. So they started thinking about import dependencies and pushing new legislation pretty much immediately after COVID, even before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And some of this legislation is quite good. So the one I particularly like is something called the Anti-Coercion Act, which is basically a legal instrument that gives the EU power, where the EU gives itself power to retaliate against companies of countries that harass us. There's a structured process. It's rules-based, it's law-based. The Commission comes with a proposal. The Council has to endorse it, but with qualified majority. So no single country can block this. And it is, I think, a good instrument because it helps you deal with threats no matter where they come from, rather than having to sort of spend a lot of time guessing, well, they're going to exploit this import dependency or this export dependency. And then finally, in my view, we've had an acceptable compromise on fiscal rules. So no one likes compromises. There's probably no person who's really enthusiastic about the new fiscal rules, but I think they are quite a bit better than the old rules, and certainly better than no rules at all. We've had less progress in other areas, very little progress on the single market, no progress on identifying tax resources for the EU budget, including for repaying the NGEU funds. So there is sort of a general commitment to repay these funds out of GNI-based national contributions. But this is clearly not desirable. It would be better to have dedicated funds, and those have not transpired yet. There are some dangers of over-regulating. Some serious people argue we have overstepped the bounds. We certainly have not, in our haste to be fast on regulation, always stuck to the usual processes of impact evaluation. We are not great on independent ex-post evaluation. And finally, there's sort of a somewhat confused debate about the EU's open rules-based model, which often fail to recognize trade-offs. So under the influence of economic nationalism in the US and in China, the question has been, should we follow them to a large extent? And that is a legitimate question. But what has not been great is the way in which this debate has been conducted, particularly with some EU legislation and some commissioners in the EU pretending that you can achieve economic security, promote decarbonization, and raise growth all at once. And that's not true. So there are trade-offs, and the debate has not been very sophisticated. It has often failed to recognize these trade-offs. So this gets me sort of to the main point. So, the volume we produce is very in the weeds. So there are recommendations in all kinds of areas. But the main impression, I'll give you some examples in a second. But the main impression I want to leave you is sort of the way in which we approach the problem intellectually. And so it really consists in two main recommendations. One is, don't pretend that there are simple solutions. And particularly, but that doesn't mean that all solutions are complicated, okay? So saying that there are no simple solutions may also be oversimplifying. So the important thing is to understand where trade-offs between policy objectives are inevitable and where they are not. Because only if you do that can you really, in a sense, make policy as efficiently as possible. So trade-offs are inevitable as a result of both limited fiscal resources. So we may argue where that resource limit is, particularly at the EU level. But we certainly know we cannot pay for everything. And, we have massive demands. So on green investment, on social cohesion, on defense. And so we have to think carefully about how to allocate those resources. The other sense in which a trade-off is inevitable is related to how open or how closed we want to be as the EU. So there is a trend towards saying that we have overshot on openness and that we need to reshore. For example, the Draghi report goes very much in that direction. Now, this may help security, it may help social cohesion, but in my view, it, for the most part, hurts growth and it would hurt the green transition. So again, not to say that we may not want to consider some reshoring, we may not want to consider some tariffs, but we have to realize that it will create problems in some areas. In contrast, there are some policy areas where there are no trade-offs, indeed, where there are complementarities. And so the main one is deepening and broadening the single market, right? So this would help both growth and economic security. Unlike, closing ourselves to trade or trying to diversify sources of trade, which of course then means that you have to buy more from more expensive sources than is currently the case. Broadening and deepening the single market helps both growth and economic security. Another area where there is no trade-off is vigorous intra-EU competition enforcement. So competition is good for both growth and external competitiveness. This is not an uncontroversial point, but that's what we believe. And finally, improvements in EU governance, like qualified majority voting, are also just a win-win. They may not be a win-win for the few veto players that want to exercise vetoes, right? But from the EU perspective, they are a win-win. So let's understand those trade-offs and particularly pursue the policies where there are these complementarities and no trade-offs. And then on how you resolve trade-offs when they're inevitable, we can have a debate. Okay, the second sense is in which we go is we think that, as a think tank, we cannot, unlike academics, we cannot ignore political economy and politics. But we do think that the problems that we are faced with are so enormous that some of these political red lines have to be challenged when trade-offs really start to bite. And what I mean by that is mainly that we do need more coordination of policies and investments across member states. So policy debates have to be more European level. They cannot be as insular as they often are. We need more delegation to the EU level where this is efficient. We need more common funding when this is efficient. Now, this may or may not mean common borrowing, but I do believe that we need a greater role for the EU budget. We need to break down remaining single market barriers. We need EU budget reform, which is difficult. It's as difficult to reform the budget as it is to expand it, because you need to then touch sacrosanct areas of spending, and we should reform EU-level decision-making. So what does this mean in practice? So these are sort of the concrete points. Of course, they're still very high level. This is still sort of headlines. So, deepening the single market is very difficult. We have tried a lot. Let's coordinate on the policy areas of highest growth impact, where so the efficiency gains are unquestionable. For us, that's mainly energy policy and energy investment, as well as capital markets, banking union, and services markets, right? And so in some of these areas, particularly on capital markets, we have seen some recent movements. Others, like banking union, continue to be extremely difficult. And on services markets, we probably should do a new push. And that is, as far as I can see, not on the political horizon. We should worry about regulatory excess and make regulation more growth friendly. Again, very difficult because a lot of regulation is justified, but there is a clear sense that we have overshot. And in order to get this right, what we need above all is a good governance to look at the impact of regulation. Some of this has not been done very seriously in the last quinquennial. We should improve and indeed expand EU-level innovation and industrial policy. This should be mission-oriented. It should be competition-friendly. It should be executed by independent institutions, like in advanced research programs agency, an ARPA-style institution that operates with discretion, but with an accountability structure. This is, I think, the only way of avoiding, these classic mistakes of backing the wrong firms. Let's not do it at the firm level. Let's do it at the sector level, or let's do it at the level of ideas, where you then effectively promote, if possible, several projects at the same time that try to push the envelope. We should reform and only then expand the EU budget. Perhaps it is not necessary to expand it if we can really reform it. And so the focus should be on European public goods, obviously, climate, cross-border infrastructure, international partnerships, that is EU foreign policy, and innovation. The common agricultural policy should be partly co-financed, at least partly, if not entirely co-financed by the national level. We believe that we should defend competition, openness, and multilateralism. And the reason is that we are a continent that is highly integrated, that very much depends on rules-based trade. Our competitiveness depends on access both to export into import markets. And it's also good for the planet to do these things. That means that we may have to make a more active use of tariffs in order to protect ourselves from unfair competition, but it should be within multilateral rules. And of course, we should be improving the WTO as an organization. We should safeguard the Green Deal and indeed extend it more globally. So what does that mean? It means protecting vulnerable groups and scaling up cost-effective international climate finance together with G7 partners. Support for Ukraine needs to continue, whatever it takes to prevent Russia winning this war. We should strengthen EU defense capabilities, create a single market for the defense industry. We need to address economic security blind spots. So that's not just imports, it's also export dependencies through assets that can be nationalized, and profit concentration. Payment systems maybe are a vulnerability. One important angle of the digital euro is that it is the security angle. So that's actually the sense in which I like this project the most. We should reset our relationship with the UK. It's time to open a new page. Our interests are very largely common. We should ensure regulatory alignment, and we should definitely include the UK in a future single market for defense production. And finally, we should reform EU decision-making for greater efficiency and to prepare for enlargement. And so the important thing about this is not only that it involves deadlocks once we have an enlarged EU, and we have seen, some of these deadlocks play out in recent years, but also that it is really instrumental, I think, to maintaining momentum for enlargement, right? So if we let in some countries and we get, these problems with veto players, the reaction will be, let's put further enlargement again on the back burner, right? And so, the countries that are still in line will really suffer from it. So this is an important angle. Okay, final point, final slide. How close are these recommendations to those of the Draghi report? So it's very similar in some important aspects. So particularly going back, these 3 points, I don't know if you can see my mouse here or not, but the 3 points where I'm arguing that there are no trade-offs, there are complementarities between policy objectives like growth and security, and so we should really push them. Single market, competition enforcement, EU governance, all these points, basically the Draghi report takes the same view. So it essentially has the same analytical framework. There are trade-offs sometimes, there are no trade-offs sometimes. Let's go for the areas where there are no trade-offs, and then the others, we're going to have to face those trade-offs, right? So intellectually, it is rather similar. It's also similar in trying to push political red lines. If anything, it is braver or goes further than our memos and pushing those red lines. Of course, it's very analytical, so it is smart and brave. It has a similar emphasis on doing more at the EU level when this is efficient, and when not, right? So we want to apply the subsidiarity principle. And so in practice, if you read the report, you will find very similar recommendations between our memos and Draghi in a whole bunch of policy areas: innovation policy, regulation, single market, competition policy. So there was a little bit of trepidation on what Draghi would say on competition enforcement and whether he would sort of throw competition enforcement under the bus. He has not, right? So he has suggested some developments in competition policy, but he has emphasized the importance of it. Public and private investment, EU budget, safeguarding the Green Deal, strengthening EU defense, and improving EU governance. All these things we are largely aligned. And then there are some really important differences as well. And I'm really not, obviously I co-authored our memo. So to the extent that there are differences, I believe we have the better approach, right? But I'm not saying that Draghi has no point, and these things are all debatable. So one important difference is that Draghi definitely does not make a pitch for maintaining rules-based international trade, right? So if you look at sort of our recommendation 5, defend competition, openness, and multilateralism. Competition, he agrees with. Openness and multilateralism, maybe a little less. So his view is very much that trade policy should be in the service of industrial policy, and that the WTO is basically dead. And he doesn't say that explicitly, but he clearly thinks, well, maybe we can try some reform, but in the meantime, let's just violate the rules, just like the Americans and the Chinese. He doesn't say it with these words, right? But his policy recommendations on things like local content requirements, for example, are very, very similar to what the Biden administration has done in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. Also very similar to the Inflation Reduction Act, he makes a very big pitch for large-scale EU subsidies to industry, particularly energy-intensive industry. And so here we are a bit more circumspect. So we do think that there is a role for EU industrial policy, but we would like it to be more targeted. And we're not entirely sure whether we should be keeping industry, energy intensive industry in Europe in its entirety in the spots in which it is currently, right? So some change in the industrial geography of Europe is probably unavoidable and maybe a good idea for the EU as a whole. He has a greater emphasis on near-term reduction of energy prices, including by reducing the fiscal burden on energy. So this is sort of the same thing. He tries to do a lot through basically taxes and subsidies. He thinks that fossil fuel prices should be reduced by reducing taxes. He also thinks that there are some short-term market fixes that in effect break a little bit the connection between marginal cost and pricing in energy markets, whereas we are more focused on fundamental market reform. He does discuss EU economic security, but he has a much narrower understanding of what it means. So for him, it basically means a reliable supply of critical raw materials for the green transition. That's what it means. It's all about imports. Whereas we also worry about export dependence, profit dependence, payments, and so forth. And then finally, and sort of this is the one thing where I'm sort of slightly, where I really think he should have gone further. He completely misses the international dimension of climate action and how it might be affected by EU policies. So he places a lot of emphasis on safeguarding the EU Green Deal. But he doesn't say anything about what we can do to accelerate decarbonization worldwide. And frankly, I'm worried that some of his plans, particularly on EU level subsidies, are going to cost so much money that there will be absolutely nothing left to support, decarbonization in areas which may be much more cost effective, which is in accelerating energy transition outside the EU, in emerging markets in particular. So this is a little bit of criticism, but on the whole, I think it's a great report. It's well argued, it's deep, and it, for the most part, it hits the right topics. Let me stop here.
Jerome, I hope you have heard the applause, and I'm not only grateful for you to be with us online, but really to also provide us this glimpse in this comparison between Bruegel analysis and Draghi report. Before I open up, I would like to engage a little bit in a discussion on what it means for the EU member countries in the East, because you address a lot of policy recommendations to the EU leadership, and the countries we're talking about is a super interesting subgroup of the EU with its own problems and its own dynamics. And the focus of today is this shift in production structure which the countries need to do. Do you, and I mean, of course, one way of the Draghi report will be to do this change process with a lot of subsidies, but probably that's not what you recommend after listening to you. I would like to ask you the question like this. Other regions in Europe are also faced with a revamp of the industrial production structure. Look at Germany, for instance. You're close to policymakers. What would be your recommendation to countries who are caught in this functional specialization trap to get out of it? Because your messages I've seen now are on a higher level, which instruments, which trade-offs. And this one, changing the production structure, looks like a big, big trade-off because you have to leave old structures before really having trust of the population in new structures. So how should the EU member countries in the East deal with this big challenge?
Right. So this is super important. So the first point I should make is that, of course, the Central and Eastern European and Southern Eastern European countries are a source of strength for the EU. And the reason is that to the extent that we are dynamic, it comes largely from those countries, right? There is still considerable catch-up growth, integration and convergence are still working. And, frankly, it raises a growth for the EU as a whole. It also offers, how do you say in English, Produktionsstandorte, a location of production that avoids some of the problems of the old EU countries, right? So lower labor cost, possibly less red tape. And so, these countries are a source of strength and they should preserve those relative strengths. The second point is that the CESEE countries are also particularly threatened, I think, by some of the things that I discussed on my first slide. So the two notable ones is, of course, the demographics is a common problem. It's also a big problem in many of our member states further east and the prospective member states further east. But, you know, it will be exacerbated by the fact that the richer Western countries have a skills shortage and demographic issue. So the issue of sort of effectively, you know, brain drain, skills drain towards the advanced EU is a big problem. And so this is, I think, why this is the real reason why the cohesion funds are important, right? So the cohesion funds should be used to offset this, to, you know, improve the local environment to the extent that, you know, people find it more attractive to stay. By the way, speaking about the Draghi report, he is really good on that. So he has a nice discussion of the role of cohesion policy and also of the tensions between cohesion policy and competitiveness, right? So cohesion policy can be a complement for competitiveness, but, you know, there is the fundamental problem, for example, that he makes is that, you know, there is services are often produced in agglomerated large urban areas. And so that's a problem if you are sort of on the periphery, rural and have smaller cities. So there are no easy solutions there, but in principle, you know, we do have a significant amount of money to do something about this, and we need to spend it safely. And, you know, essentially the way I would spend it is a mix of improving skills and making sure that the skills stay in the country. The improving skills is important because, you know, fundamentally the selling point of Central and Eastern Europe within the EU is that you can get similar skills for less money, right? And this is how we promote industrialization. The final point is on the supply chains, energy-intensive industry, the role of the auto industry. So this is indeed very worrisome. So Draghi spends a lot of attention on the auto industry. He has a whole chapter on this. You may or may not find it convincing, right? I don't find everything in there convincing, but he pays a lot of attention. And so, you know, we need some smart combination of protection against a very sudden collapse of the auto market as a result of Chinese competition, which is certainly something he endorses, and structural change where, you know, this industry becomes more competitive in part by spinning off energy intensive stages of production. And so the important thing is going to be that balance, right? How can we preserve the strengths while at the same time understanding that we are going to have to shed some energy intensive production in order to stay competitive.
Very much. So now we know which chapters to look up to directly link into burning Eastern European questions. We have now spent 45 minutes. We have 15 minutes more, and I'll ask for questions. I hope the people will tell you yourself, otherwise I tell you who is asking. Julia will, as a host here, and then Franz, and then Andreas. It seems like the old central bank group is dominant, but I encourage other people to really ask questions. Julia, and please questions, no statements.
Yeah. Thank you. Just a brief statement. I couldn't agree more with many of the things you said, and I think we have to rethink our teaching also of economics, of the multiple objectives of economic policy. There seem to be some new trade-offs here. Very specifically, on the 10 points that you recommend that you give as advices, I have 3 very specific questions. So on the innovation and industrial policy, you suggest a new independent institution, but we do have productivity councils. So we have a lot of, my feeling is rather that we have an abundance of institutions, and more institutions imply more coordination. So maybe you can elaborate a little bit on this. Then on the rules-based international trade, I very much agree with that. But who is still like-minded in this world? The US, to some extent, maybe still, yes, but if you look at the big traders, who should we align with? And then on the economic security part, I really appreciate that you expand this, not restricted to getting the inputs and the imports we need. The only thing I was a bit puzzled is that you mentioned payment systems. Maybe you can elaborate also on this, and this could be also one point where hopefully we see tangible results in the staged accession soon. Yeah, curious to hear what you mean by that. Thank you.
Because if everybody asks 3 questions, please. Yeah. Did you hear the questions, Chairman?
Yes,
it's
I
your
did.
turn now.
Should I answer, or do you want to collect?
No,
Should I
please,
answer?
please. It's already 3 questions.
Okay,
Otherwise,
sure,
the list is too
absolutely.
long.
Okay, got it. Okay, so look, basically, getting industrial policy or innovation policy right is really hard, and so in our memos we sort of play around. I mean, the main reason why it's hard is because the state doesn't know a whole lot, right? It doesn't normally know more than the market. And then the other reason why it's hard is because you tend to protect incumbents when you do industrial policy, and that's actually bad for business dynamism, for new entrants, right? So these are the 2 fundamental problems. So how do you get around these problems? And so the idea is, I think, industrial policy has to be pro-competitive, meaning you should never just focus on subsidizing a single firm, right? So put your eggs into baskets. Let firm compete for subsidies. You can align, for example, assign some through auctions, and in other cases, you select multiple candidates. So this is one idea. The second idea is, don't try to predetermine technologies that you're going to support. So define objectives, like green industrialization, sort of broad societal objectives, and then put sort of smart people in charge that make discretionary decisions on how you actually promote this. So the thing that I don't like, for example, about the Net Zero Industry Act of the EU is that it has a predetermined list of whatever, 8 technologies or something like that are worth subsidizing, right? So I'm sort of old-fashioned. I think things should be as technology neutral as possible. Now, the reason why I'm sort of optimistic that this type of industrial policy can be successful is because, in part, because I worked at EBRD. So EBRD and maybe to some extent EIB are at some level industrial policy organizations, except they want to get money back, right? Which is also always a good disciplining device. No, you can't do it for everything because sometimes you do need to subsidize, but it's a good disciplining device. And so the idea is that you can have governance structures that allow sort of people who are experts, who know a sector, who know an industry, to make discretionary choices, but with an accountability structure around them. And so this is what I meant by new institutions. So the sort of the lacking institution is an institution that is not about investing. So investing we have. So that's EIB, EBRD, but it's about basically research and development grants for promising new ideas. And so that needs to be done ad hoc, very discretionary, conditional on societal objectives. And the Americans have a model for that, which I think has worked well. It's actually not that expensive. It's a few billion, but it's not more than 10 billion. It's tiny compared to the Inflation Reduction Act, right? And those are the ARPAs in the US. There have been attempts in Europe to do something like that. The Germans have something like that, but as far as I can tell, and I don't know it very well, so if anyone from Germany is in there who knows this better, they should speak up. But my sense is that they haven't given these people enough independence. So basically they have a sort of a German DARPA type thing, but there are several ministries who decide whether they're doing the right thing or not. And that's really dangerous. Okay, so you don't want to do that. So that's what I meant. Okay, then who is still like-minded on trade? I think Japan, Korea, Canada, at least until very recently, before they emulated the US on having these sort of very ad hoc tariffs on China, but in principle, still Canada. And then, potentially we can get allies among emerging markets who are very interested in having an open trading system. So I don't think this is a completely lost cause. And finally, on payments, so basically what I had in mind is the Americans. So, we're very focused on China as a threat, and that's true. But imagine Trump gets elected in November. It's still about 50-50. He could do all kinds of crazy things to harm Europe. And if he does it, he's not going to do it by withholding US exports. Okay, that he will not do. So we will not face a threat on the import side, because what he loves more than anything is to sell stuff. But he may do it through the payment system. And there is, of course, a precedent for that, which was secondary sanctions on EU companies who did not, when the US decided to pull out of the Iran deal, and the EU wanted to preserve it. And so, it's the preeminence, the international preeminence of the dollar. It's the international preeminence of US companies in digital payments, Visa and MasterCard. And so, part of the digital euro is, I think, to create an infrastructure where we would not need that.
Thank you. If you promise me, Franz and Andreas, each one short question will make it to hand over in schedule. Is that okay?
Yes, Jerome, you mentioned the car problem. We were just recently in China with the Euro 50 group and the Chinese and the Americans. The message which came out, the Chinese are really desperate to increase their car exports because otherwise they get deflation if they do not increase enormously their exports. And the only export market which is really big and open to them, it's the EU export market, because the US told them forget the American market. So what should we do? We will have these tariffs, but shouldn't we use these tariffs as the income from the tariffs as a subsidy to improve our value chain for cars? And overall, isn't it a big problem that we have a most efficient policy for climate change, carbon pricing, whereas the US and China, they subsidize their industries, which will be able to destroy our industries? Thank you.
Thank you. Andreas?
Okay. I think we subsidize too, but more nationally anyway. The question relates only to the energy markets and the energy market design. You showed that Draghi too mentioned this, and indeed, I mean, what's clear is that this Repower EU Act and all these issues that are covered by Green Deal and so on, these are more or less clear. But the energy design issues, the market competition within the energy markets, all these issues, whether there should be competition at the local level with local prices, or whether there should be one single European price, all these issues are, at least from my point of view, not really addressed nowadays. Does Bruegel think about these issues?
Thank you.
Okay. Should I answer?
Yes, please. This is the final round. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so to Andreas, absolutely. So the area that Bruegel has been, I think, the strongest in of any area was energy policy over the last year. It sort of reflects the fact that we have built up capacity in this. There is the leading expert on this is Georg Zachmann. There is a really nice paper. There are two important papers, a recent one. One is with him, Simone Tagliapietra and Jean Pisani-Ferry, about the governance of the EU Green Deal. This came out in September last year. And then there's one called Unity in Power, which is basically about reform and unification of electricity markets in the EU and many other things. So Draghi actually says some really good things about the energy market. So he argues for more European level regulatory oversight. He argues for a Europeanization of network operation. And so this is good, but he does not go as far as we have in saying, let's really create a unified EU electricity market. Let's do much more EU-wide coordination of renewables investments to sort of exploit the gains from trade, of having different types of electricity generation in areas of comparative advantage. So, whatever, wind in north and hydro in the Alps and and sun in the south, that sort of thing. So this is all still much too nationally focused. So we would have want him to go even further on that. And then on Franz, I mean, basically, Franz, my sense is that you're really going to like the Draghi report because he essentially takes your line. So he says we need to both protect and subsidize. So the thing that I sort of, so the sense in which I disagree is that I do agree with the protect part in the sense that, you know, I do endorse the EU subsidies on EVs, EU tariffs on EVs, the countervailing tariffs. And partly I endorse them because they were very carefully argued, right? They did a very good job of really trying to derive it as a countervailing tariff based on the subsidies that actually have been received by those car companies. And I think this is important in order to essentially prevent a tariff war and having everything go out of hand and kill the WTO, right? And so that's the casualty that I'm worried about, and Draghi is less worried about it. And then on subsidies, I think, you know, we have to strike some sort of balance between preventing a wipeout of an industry during a temporary period of Chinese overproduction and very low prices, right? So it's a bit like a Dutch disease problem, right? It's as if we had a huge real appreciation of the euro, and so industry would be wiped out as a result of that. Of course, we cannot have that, right? So we have to offset that. But at the same time, we will also want to encourage some structural change, and it is probably not efficient to have all the energy intensive stuff in Europe, particularly in the places where it is now, over the long term, right? So think about it a bit like I mean, this is an extreme example, but think about the quartz shock that was suffered by the Swiss watch industry, right? So they basically became obsolete as a result of quartz technology. They managed to adjust and they survived in an important niche of the market. I'm not saying that the EU has to go that way with the automotive industry. I hope it will be still mass production of cars, not just luxury production, but some adaptation needs to happen. And, you know, this reflects the fact that some of the competitive strengths of these Chinese producers are probably going to be there in the long run, right? So even after there's consolidation in the Chinese market, even after the overcapacity problem is addressed in China, it's not going to be the same competitive situation for Europe as in the past. And some of it will mean that we will have to restructure and adapt. So I don't want subsidies that are geared towards just preserving everything that exists.
Okay, that was very clear. Jeremy, you set the stage for a whole afternoon. Your thoughts will go on this afternoon, I'm sure. Thank you also to the audience, and those who did not ask a question, I encourage you to read Bruegel publications and follow Jeremy on social media, always insightful. Thank you for being with us, and all best regards to Brussels.
Thank you, my great pleasure.
Well, let me welcome you now to the one and only session of this workshop. There is only one session, and it will be followed then after the break by a panel discussion. We are well inspired, I would say, by Jeromin's lecture now, and we are also proud that we can add ourselves to the current discussion on competitiveness. So in this session, we will present you genuine and new research that comes out from a project that the Österreichische Nationalbank has done jointly with the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies and the European Investment Bank. And I'm very happy to welcome with me three excellent experts, researchers from each institution who will guide you through relevant issues specific to Central, Eastern and Southeastern European region. So our guiding question in this research was, does the region need a new growth model? And admittedly, the question is, of course, not new at all. We've been discussing the new growth model for Central Eastern Europe almost for decades by now. And also some of the recipes are not new either. So the region is strong in manufacturing and in exporting, and therefore it should probably build on these strengths. But we also identified important gaps, so we need to think further. we will hear in a minute, energy costs and energy intensity remain high in the region. Labor market prospects are particularly dim. Jeromin told us for the whole of Europe, but we have a compounding effect in Central and Eastern Europe, which is brain drain and emigration. And the capital stock is low and innovative activity is lagging behind. So what can the experts here tell us now in answer to these questions? We will have 3 presentations of 15 minutes each. I will really keep the time here very strictly. So please keep your comments and your additions ready, because I will call you in after the 3 presentations. Let me briefly introduce the 3 speakers. I have here to my left Francesca Guadagno, who works at the WIIW. She's a profound expert on industrial policy, innovation, and new technologies, and she also employed innovative new technology research design to identify promising products and sectors for the CESEE economies. So Francesca, we are curious to hear what you found out and where you see the strategic options for these countries. But we will keep the order of the project in presenting the research here. Then further to my left is Jochen Schanz, who works at the EIB on drivers of economic growth and cohesion. He has a very broad experience, both thematically but also geographically. I would say he has also looked at Europe from the other side of the channel before, and he will add to our understanding of what's needed to spur convergence. So thank you for being with us here today, Jochen. And then Tomasz Slačik, a very respected colleague in our team at OeNB, brings in his very long-standing experience on the topic as well. He has also worked for different institutions, for the EIB, for the ECB, and he will now kick off the discussion and set the stage by a short recap of the successful catching up so far, and also you will point to some existing gaps. So Tomasz, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, warm welcome from my side. Good afternoon. Before I start, I would like to come back to what Birgit said about the previous project of ours, about the automotive industry. Birgit said that there was one prophetic sentence. This is not correct. I would say the whole report is very prophetic, as many people might now realize as they wake up to reality. So before you start reading the Draghi's report on what he has to say about the automotive industry, please go back to our report and read that one. It's a very nice bedtime reading. Okay. Now I was asked to set the stage or introduce the whole project here, the current project between the 3 institutions. And I would start by referring to this article in Financial Times, which was published on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the Big Bang expansion of the EU, where mostly Central and Eastern and Southeastern European countries joined. The article basically hailed the great economic success that had been reached over the last 20 years. But at the same time, it expressed some concerns, saying that the countries probably now need to find new sources of growth to avoid losing their competitive edge. So is this just crying wolf, or shall we really prick our ears to what is going on and going to happen next? Since all good things come in 3s, especially presentations, I'll also structure my presentation in 3 parts. I'll first talk about the past and future convergence performance in the region, and especially ask a question and try to answer the question whether the fat years are over. Then we'll have a deeper dive into the factors behind growth and convergence, capital, labor, and also the economic structure. And finally, I'll wrap up and come to policy conclusions. The CESEE region has certainly managed to converge significantly vis-à-vis the benchmarks in advanced countries, especially if you look at it in per capita terms, because they have also faced quite a significant demographic problem. I'll come back to that later. So if you look at GDP per capita in PPP terms especially, and you compare 97, that's the horizontal axis, and 2023 on the vertical axis, everything that is above the red line means that they have converged towards Germany. And you see all of the countries in the region converged, actually. Most of them converge more than China. This is basically the vertical distance from the red line. And some of the countries in PPP terms are now even richer than some of the old EU member states like Italy or Spain, which have actually diverged, measured against Germany. But then if you divide the period of the last, say, 25 years into two periods, you realize that growth was very strong before the global financial crisis in 2008, but then it slowed down significantly, basically in all countries in the region. I'm showing you here the potential GDP growth, but you see the same if you look at actual GDP. The decline in potential GDP growth suggests that there are some structural reasons rather than cyclical in the background. And then if you decompose this into the the usual factors, labor, capital, and productivity, you realize that most of this goes back or is ascribable to the decline in total factor productivity. And what is more, if you look at the outlook, at the years that lie ahead, there is no major improvement on the horizon, or on the contrary, a further decline. So this basically calls, no boost can be expected probably in the years to come, and this calls for the CESEE to make their own efforts to somehow polish their model, their economic growth model. Let's have a deeper dive now into the factors. I'll start with capital. So if we look at the capital stock, this is the capital stock compared to Germany. Germany is 100%. You see that the capital stock per person employed in Central and Eastern Europe, that's the blue bars on the left-hand side, is significantly lower than in the old EU countries. So now you could be wondering whether investment has been too low, so whether there has been an investment gap. And this is a very tricky question to ask and especially to answer. It is very difficult to measure the investment gap, and it depends on very many different things. We tried in the paper to measure investment against, in a neoclassical growth model, against the very lower bound, which is the investment level that that stabilizes the capital to output ratio. And against that benchmark, at least, we find that investment has been sufficient, but as I said, you have to take it with a grain of salt, and it certainly is the very lower bound. So investment could certainly be higher, but for various reasons, it is not. And if you ask firms, that's what the EIB is doing in their very comprehensive investment survey, where they ask very many firms what the obstacles to more investment are. Firms in the CESEE region, they typically name over the last 3 years over the last couple of years quite consistently, certainly, they name these 3 factors, which is uncertainty, energy costs, and availability of skilled staff. Those are the major obstacles to more investment. Indeed, if we look at energy costs, I have here a chart showing electricity prices, and you can see that energy in CESEE is not cheap in EU-wide comparison. The dashed and the dotted line, the top and the bottom, mark the maximum and minimum in the EU, and they are certainly much more expensive if you compare with international competitors like the US. I have a similar chart for gas, but I'll skip it here, not to overwhelm you. What also matters in the CESEE region is that the economies are still very energy intense. So despite some improvements over the last decades, the energy usage per unit of GDP is still a lot higher. EU here is 100. And you see that per unit of GDP, the CESEE countries need much more energy than the EU benchmark. And another point, final point on energy that I would like to make here is that the largest consumers, this is the 5 largest industrial consumers, they still rely heavily on fossil fuel-based energy sources. That's the first 3 colors from the bottom. So up to 70% are basically fossil fuel-based, and those are set to rise in the future. So there is an issue, apparently, that the countries will have to deal with. Now, I would like to come to the next production factor, which is labor. In general, in terms of labor supply, the CESEE countries, they perform quite comparably well compared to the benchmarks, but there are certainly underutilized pools, potentials of labor that should be activated, especially given the demographic challenge. As you can see, all of the countries in the region, they will be facing, have been facing, and are facing quite an adverse demographic development or demographic projection. So against that background, they should really try hard to activate dormant labor potential among women, minorities, youth, all these cohorts. We detail all this in the paper, and also increase inter-regional mobility. On the positive front, or on the positive note, by and large, human capital in CESEE is still very comparable, if not even outperforming advanced economies. Of course, there's quite some heterogeneity across countries and over time. And there are certainly areas where they should catch up or really work hard to keep up. But by and large, the human capital endowment is certainly comparable. Now, what you also notice, if you look at labor supply in CESEE, you realize that in the CESEE countries, people tend to work significantly longer hours, between 20% and 20% in Bulgaria and 50% in Poland, more than in Germany, for instance, per year. And this has several reasons, but one of the reasons is certainly the lower labor productivity. So despite the improvement, that's the orange dots, they mark year 2019, and the bars, this is the relative labor productivity as in percent of the EU in 2000. So you see some improvements, but it's a lot of lower than in the EU. And what is worse, labor productivity growth has also decelerated. So it's lower now than it used to be. There's a whole bunch of reasons behind the decline in productivity growth, but one of them, a prominent one, might be the innovative capacity, and this basically refers to the focus project that will be introduced by Jochen later on. So if you look at this is the worldwide rank in the Global Innovation Index. This is a very comprehensive index that measures or comprises more than 80 innovation indicators. And you can see that among the 30 top performers worldwide, all of the old EU member states, except for Greece, are among those top 30, whereas there is only one, Estonia, from the CESEE region. So in terms of innovative capacity, there is certainly room for improvement. Now, turning to the economic structure, there have been some shifts, but nonetheless, manufacturing remains the key sector, especially in many countries with a very strong focus on the automotive industry. And what is remarkable here, it is the competitiveness of the manufacturing sector, which has improved, and it doesn't maybe, the picture doesn't really convey this message, but if you look at this, all of the countries actually improved since 2000 their competitiveness, and this is the worldwide rank. So a country like the Czech Republic, for instance, is the 16th most competitive country in terms of the industrial performance worldwide, which is actually quite impressive. And if you look at some of the sub-indices of that composite index, like, for instance, the industrial export quality, then you realize that some of the countries really fare among the top performers worldwide. This shows, again, compares the year 2000 against 2019. And you see that most of the countries actually have improved their competitiveness and that they are now, in terms of their industrial export quality at least, that they are very comparable with Germany or even better. One of the reasons, what is behind this, what this is owed to, is certainly the deep integration in the global value chains. But this has certainly advantages, but also disadvantages, and bears risks and vulnerabilities. You might all remember iconic pictures like this one, where during and after the pandemic, due to the shortage of car producers, they had to rent runways like this, for instance, where they had to park unfinished cars where only one chip was missing. So this is the cyclical vulnerabilities, but of course there are also the structural vulnerabilities, and now I'm coming back to what Birgit actually alluded to already. This is the smile curve. So along the production process, you have different functions with different value added, and typically the production, which is in the middle of the process, has the lowest value added. And in a country like Germany, you get the smile. So functions with higher value added, like headquarters or support services, they tend to concentrate in a country like Germany. Whereas a typical CESEE country like Slovakia is very concentrated on the production function, and this is what Birgit referred to as basically the functional specialization trap, where the disadvantage of this deep integration in global value chains is basically the cemented structure, and countries in the region will certainly have to make an effort to get away from this cemented structure. Now, wrapping up, I'll skip this. This basically all just repeats the messages that I've just said, and I would move straight to the policy conclusions. So the countries in the region, they will certainly have to grow faster and better. And how are they supposed to get there? From our point of view, they should reduce their energy intensity. They should make every effort to render energy cheaper and greener. How? By investing in energy generation, distribution, and storage, reconsidering structural features of the energy market. We have heard some allusions to that already in the previous contribution and discussion. So they might also give a second thought about the pricing and taxation in the energy market. They should activate the dormant labor and upgrade human capital and become more innovative. Finally, they should also broaden their functional specialization towards more knowledge-intense value chain functions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tomasz. And while we move to the next presentation by Francesca, I would just like to ask if there are any questions of understanding, very quick things that you would like to clarify upfront concerning Tomasz's presentation. So if there is, it's all clear. So if I recap correctly, then we have this slowdown in all forms of productivity, total factor productivity, labor productivity, and so a bit the glass is sort of getting more empty, but still some bright spots like the high level.
Less full.
Huh?
Less full, the glass.
Yeah, it's becoming more, less full, more empty. We can debate on that. But we move straight on to where are some potentials for CESEE. Francesca, please.
Thank you very much, Julia, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here today to present this paper, which was joint work with Robert Sterer and Doris Hansel-Weiss. The motivation of the paper is by now pretty straightforward, I think. So we already mentioned this idea that the current growth model that had led to economic growth and convergence and structural change for the past 20 years has reached its limits. We have done a lot of work at VEV, some of the work you see cited there on the topic, and we claim that there is a pressing need to find a new model based on new growth potentials. And based on this idea, we then try to move one step further and to propose a framework, a first framework and a first exploratory analysis to try to identify which could be these possible growth potentials. And we do this by combining different data sources and using highly disaggregated data, as I will show later. So the structure of the paper is basically, the paper is structured around three main analyses. So we set the scene by looking at data on industry structure, so value-added data, and competitiveness, so revealed comparative advantages indexes. And this is meant, with this analysis, we want to understand in which industry do these countries specialize, how specialization has changed, which sectors have grew the most from 2013 to 2020. And then we move to the most substantial part of the paper, which is exactly on the identification of these growth potentials, using the product space framework that I'm going to introduce to you in a few slides, and using highly disaggregated expert data. And here what we want to find is certain product categories, so highly detailed, let's say, products that satisfy two characteristics that are technically feasible, so that make sense in the region, so they build on what the region can already do, on the competencies, skills, resources that are already present in the countries, but also that can allow for some upgrading, that can allow for technological progress, because we need this new model. In a nutshell, the first part of the analysis shows is very much in line, that our results are very much in line with what Thomas was mentioning before. The idea that manufacturing is still an important sector for the region, although value-added and competitiveness have slightly decreased. The region maintains its comparative advantage, and the countries that were specialized in certain sectors that became engine of growth are still deepening this specialization, so for example in motor vehicles and electrical equipment. At the same time, we also see the emergence of new sectors, most prominently computer programming, consultancy, and information services, which are actually standing out as quite successful industries, and could potentially point to a first shift towards new activities in the value chain, so that the smile curve might be starting to move. I want to be optimistic. Before going into the findings regarding the products and the product space, I'd like to spend a few minutes to explain what the product space is. And I hope I'm not making anyone nervous with this. It looks very complicated, but I'll try to give you the intuition. So the product space is essentially the representation of trade, of exports between countries, and it's a network where all the products are, each of the dots you see is a product at the 4-digit level. And products you see are linked because it's a network, so are linked to each other. When they are linked, it is because we assume, we consider that the two products are similar. So the color of the dots represent broadly defined categories or sectors. So here, for example, you see all this cluster here is in green, and this is textile products. And it is quite intuitive to think that producing a T-shirt might require the same knowledge, the same capabilities, the same production inputs than producing a trouser. So the idea is that if you are already producing a T-shirt, the trouser could be a good diversification opportunity for you if you want to maintain and build on your competencies. So this is an important part of the product space. So the idea that similar products are placed together. But the thing is that not all the products are the same, and we know that very well intuitively. We know that the typical example is the potato chip and the microchip. So there are differences. So there are differences in the complexity of the product. So how much knowledge you need, how much innovation you need, what type of labor you need to produce certain type of products differs. Therefore, countries not just want to diversify, but they also want to upgrade, so to move into more complex products. And the most simple way to explain this concept is using actually a metaphor that was introduced by Hausmann and Hidalgo, so the fathers, so to say, of this idea. And the metaphor goes as follows. You can think of the product space as a forest where each dot is a tree, and the country is the monkey that wants to diversify and goes from one tree to the next in order to get to the most complex parts of the product space. And the most complex part of the product space is this one, is the core, is placed in the middle. So everything that you see around is less complex based on how these indicators are computed. What is more complicated is here. So what it requires more knowledge is here. So everybody wants to be in the center. That's the main idea. The size of the dot, you might wonder what they indicate. In this case, they indicate world exports, but it depends on the researcher intention, what you want to show. To put it more real and more practical, here I'm comparing two product spaces of the most complex country in the region, Czechia, and the least complex country, Bulgaria. So what do we see? How do we read these graphs? So first thing, you see that compared to the graph before, you still see that the green is textiles and it's in the same place. Products are always in the same place. But what you see here, because this is for a country, it's not for the whole world, you see that some dots are gray and some dots are colored. The dots that are gray, it is because the country is not very competitive in those products. But the areas of strength, so where the country is really good at, you see it colored. So by comparing these two product spaces, what you immediately see is a strong, for example, specialization in textiles for Bulgaria, while Czechia lost it. But at the same time, you see here, these are vehicles, so parts of motor vehicle products that are important for Czechia and not for Bulgaria. And you see also that here is much more colorful than in Bulgaria, showing a higher complexity, so that there are more competencies in producing complex products in Czechia compared to Bulgaria. So if you have any question at the end, I'm happy to take clarifying questions. So using this framework and these indicators, we try to follow an approach that could lead us to identify some growth potentials. How do we do this? So for us, I already said it, promising product is a product that is in line with the specialization of the region, but also that allows for that upgrading. So to move to something more valuable. So we look essentially at the products for which, so we try to find these products by focusing on products for which competitiveness is low today. We focus on manufacturing products that allow country to upgrade, so they are more complex than what the country is already exporting. There is technically no point in moving from T-shirt to trousers, at least not from an upgrading perspective. And based on that, we come up with a list of growth potentials for each country, which we then put together, and we find common targets for the whole region. This is an example of one of the 40+ tables that you will find in our studies, where we report the products that we identify for each country. And here you see the top 20 growth potentials for Slovakia. How do we read this table? So there are different ways in which you can read this table. You can say, okay, there are a lot, oops, sorry, I still keep changing, confusing the buttons. So there are a lot of products, there are machinery, there are some chemicals, one vehicle, and that's one way to look at it. Or you could say, okay, which is the product for which the competitiveness is among the highest. So here you see, for example, this product here, microscopes, for which already the country has already quite some competencies. Or you could ask yourself, what is the easiest among these? So what is the closest to me? And the closest to you is the one with the lowest distance. So these products are essentially the easiest targets for a country like Slovakia, based on this framework, where here on the bottom you see the products that would be more difficult to diversify into because they are more distant to what the country is already producing, which means that the country would need to acquire new skills, new knowledge to be able to make that jump. You remember the monkey? So this is a monkey that is making a jump to a tree that is far away. But what you also can read from this table is that there are certain cases in which the more you stay close, the lower the complexity of the product. So the lower that jump in upgrading. PCI stands for Product Complexity Index. I hope this answers.
I have one clarifying question. Distance means all those products are not produced now?
Yeah, they are not produced or produced. In this case, they are produced, but without a comparative advantage. So, for example, the comparative advantage could be as low as 0.04. So distance is a measure of easiness. So how easy it is for the country to take on this other product. So what I was saying is that, talking about trade-offs, there is a trade-off here that if, in many cases, the closer you are to what you produce, the lower the benefit you get in terms of complexity. So you want to, in a way, in certain cases, have a mix of the growth potentials where you have some more realistic targets that are closer to you and more ambitious targets that allow you to jump to the next tree. So when we do this exercise for all the countries of the region, and we then put them all together. And what we find is that because the countries have similar specializations today, of course, the growth potentials are recurrent. So you find the same products emerging for different countries. While this could be disappointing, I still think that it doesn't completely invalidates the analysis essentially for three reasons. One reason is that if we make it practical and we look, for example, at one product, the textile fabrics, we see that there are 5 countries for which this could be a good option. But maybe for one country, this product is closer to the product space, for the other is a riskier bet, and the country maybe doesn't want to go to a riskier bet. So it also becomes a policy decision of where do you want to invest, first thing. Second thing, so how risky you want to be. What is your goal beyond upgrading? Second thing is that this is, although it is quite disaggregated as an analysis, you can still think of a variety of textile fabrics, a variety of markets, a variety of activities that you could do within that industry. So there is still a possibility for a smart specialization in this setting. And the third idea is that it's never a good idea to pick a sector because 3 indicators tell you that this is a good sector. We are not claiming that this is the ultimate list of products that the countries should focus on. This is a very complex exercise to actually make a list of products for an industrial policy, and it cannot be based on 2 indicators. So this type of exercises need a combination of databases on, for example, employment, FDI. Maybe there is already some universities doing some research or some work on certain textile materials in Estonia and not in Lithuania, and then that's a better option. So it really requires a deeper understanding, a more comprehensive analysis than what we have done when you want to make an industrial policy. And I'm ready to conclude. So the 3 takeaways: manufacturing very relevant for the region, but new services, especially modern services, are becoming increasingly important. The good news is that with the set of capabilities that these countries already possess, there is a possibility to find new growth potential that are still based on what this country can do. So they can still build on their capabilities to move to the next stage. In certain countries, this would require a combination, so a sort of portfolio of more risky and less risky bets. But this is not bad news. I mean, this is not a gloomy scenario. So as I said, our results should not be taken as a ready-made list that tomorrow can be used to make a policy document. It is more meant to show how data and sophisticated indicators like the one these two that I showed today can inform policymaking, how policymaking can be more data-driven, can be more transparent. But we still think that there is a need for a battery of indicators, perspectives from different sectors, reality checks on the ground to really make an industrial policy. And with this, I conclude. Thanks.
So again, while we move to the final presentation in this session, I give you a chance to clarify maybe another technical question. You have a technical question?
Yes, I have a technical question.
I allow it.
Can we maybe go back to the table that you showed before you concluded?
I have the new presentation on, so maybe you can start.
But it's also on our blog, which was published 2 days ago, so I recommend you to go to the OeNB website and read our blogs. So this table we have there as well. Yeah.
Just to take one example, the motor vehicle parts, for instance, that's the third line from the bottom. All of the countries, all of the countries basically that are already active in that area don't have a cross. All the other countries, especially the Baltics, do have a cross. So
that's by construction.
How are we supposed to read this?
Yeah, that's by construction, because I said that if the competitiveness is already high, we don't consider it as a group potential. It's a choice. It's just because we're looking for new diversification idea. So we are looking for new products now.
This is where you could
doesn't say anything about those countries which are already active in that area. It only is a statement about countries like the Baltics which should move in.
It's a statement that this could be an interesting area for the Baltics.
Okay. The whole exercise is about identifying potentials for future production. Yeah, one question, Andreas, and then we move to the, Andreas, Mike?
Yes, okay. I was expecting this question.
That it doesn't have potential.
Yes. So I will try to explain it in an intuitive way. So the product space is a very effective tool when the country still has to discover some parts of the forest. It becomes less and less interesting when the country is already in the complex area. So you remember what I said at the beginning, Czechia is the most complex country in the region, and it's actually worldwide one of the most complex economy. So you see that this area is already pretty populated. So there is, from the product space analysis, there is no way you could move to another tree improving, and that would lead you to an improvement in your complexity. So the product space is already completely explored from that point of view. So what the implication of this is that what Czechia should do probably, is looking at new products. So innovation and new technologies that can help moving into from a functional perspective to a new activity, or really to invent the next product, the next dot.
Also, if I may, this is restricted on manufacturing, so there are also services.
There are also services which are not included in the product.
Thank you all also for the interest, and I think we will move now in these other areas where potentially we could find new sources of growth. Please, Jochen.
Thanks, Julia. Also, thank you for organizing the session and hosting all of our papers today here in this workshop. Thank you for your interest. Here we go. So that's the paper I'm going to present. It's co-authored with 2 authors from the EIB. Matteo is here, is just taking pictures, as I see, perfect. Proving that we were actually here in Vienna, not just enjoying the very nice city. So Our paper is structured in two parts, common elements and a set of country dashboards that are meant to illustrate the variety of innovation performance of the different countries. We thought it's best to separate the two because there's so much heterogeneity, but at the same time there are common elements that are worth pointing out. Among the common elements, we focus on the role of foreign-owned firms, on the skills shortage, and which Thomas has already talked a bit about, and then on bringing new ideas to the market. And I'll just show some overview slides now from the common elements and with a bit more detail on the foreign-owned firms. But I would just like to start to show the common trends and still the heterogeneity with an example using business R&D here on the right-hand side, right? And I also want to use this chart to make the main points that I think that you can use as the main takeaway of our analysis, even if all the following graphs, even if I don't succeed in explaining them properly. So the first point is the economies have become more innovative, right? Over the last 2 decades, you see that business R&D relative to GDP in the region, Central and Eastern Europe, which is the dark blue line, has increased, right? That's point number one. The economies have become more innovative. Point number two is the rest of the world has as well, right? So just because the region has become more innovative, it doesn't mean that there's any form of convergence happening in terms of innovation of the economy. So you see that first by looking at the northwest of the EU here in the yellow line, which, by the way, we always take as benchmarks. Thomas, you have taken Germany as benchmark. Being German, I'm not sure whether Germany should work as a benchmark. So we rather take the GDP-weighted average of North and Western Europe pretty much throughout as a benchmark, if not the US or even China. But what you see here with the yellow line is that R&D expenditures of businesses relative to GDP in the northwest of Europe are at each instant bigger than those in the CESEE region, and they are also increasing, right? So that's the point about convergence. Improvement itself does not mean convergence. And if you then look at examples like China, then of course you see that improvement can also happen much faster than it has happened in the Central and Eastern European region. The blue shade is just to illustrate the heterogeneity of countries. So you see that at some point, some countries in the regions have had higher business R&D relative to their GDP than the Northwestern average. And there are also always some countries which have, where businesses do very little R&D. Similar message is emerging from this chart here. So you see on the left-hand side a chart that compares the R&D intensity of an economic sector with its contribution to growth, right? And that's on the left, it's for Central and Eastern Europe. On the right, it's for the northwest of the EU. So what you see on the left, and it's circled by this red line here, what you see is a good message, right? It's the research-intensive sectors that have contributed most to R&D. It's manufacturing, ICT, professional services, right? Now, the relatively bad message is exactly the same is true in the north and west of the EU, right? With the difference that, albeit that the growth rates are lower, we all know that the region has grown more than the northwest of the EU average. The sectors that have contributed most to growth, right, are actually much more research intensive than they are in the East, right? So obviously there's just more. It looks from this data at least that there's more substance in terms of R&D on the type of innovation that you see in the northwest of the EU relative to the region. Now, the left chart here is about labor productivity, and I'm not going to go into it because, again, Thomas has already talked about it. But and the right chart is talking about the novelty of innovations, and it takes as a basis data collected by the survey that Thomas has already referred to that the EIB does every year of 12,000 firms in the EU plus some more in the US, only on their investment behavior, right, including innovation and greening and all these things. So this gives us a huge database on which we can say not something just about mean performances, right, not just about the average, but we can say also something about the distribution. And I think this is something that we can contribute here to the research, that we say a little bit more about how the performance is spreading across good and across firms, right? And what you see here is when you ask firms about how novel their innovations were, right? And we have asked them, I'm showing you here the results for the US and for the Northwest, again for the Northwest of the EU and for the region right, just on the right. When you ask them how innovative were you during the past financial years, then most of them will tell you, well, we haven't innovated at all. And that's normal, right? We also interview quite a lot of smaller firms, and not every year you change something to your business processes or bring out a new product. But then and that's shown in the darkest blue shade. That basically tells you around 60% of the firms, on average, every year have not innovated in the preceding year in Central and Eastern Europe. And then the lighter shades of blue, they basically tell you that a smaller share of firms have integrated a new service, right, a new business process, have developed a new product that's new to the firm. Then again, a lighter shade of blue that's new to the country, and then very few ones, but still a few, they have actually introduced something that's new globally. And coming back to what Francesca just showed us, right, what you captured with your analysis are those innovations that were new to the country, right, or that could be new to the country if they were actually being implemented. Focused on goods due to the data that you had available, whereas here we also ask about services, service innovation. What we do not ask is how important was the innovation for you? What's the quality of the innovation? Did it just concern a small part of the business or something large? And that matters, because if you compare here the eastern region with the northwest of the EU, if you look at firms' self-assessments about how innovative they are, there's not much difference between the bars, the middle one that's describing the northwest and the right. Right? There's not much difference there. Still, when you look at how much is being invested in R&D and in digital, and how much is invested in digital products, the differences are much larger. So here the charts are very similar in terms of their construction, right? So here the dark blue part of the bars on the left-hand side is the share of firms that invest hardly anything in R&D, right? Less than 1% of their investment expenditure goes on average into R&D. And you see for the CESEE region, that's close to 80%. And it's this share of firms that do not invest hardly at all in R&D is just much higher in the region than in the Northwest and the US. And I think for me, the attractiveness of looking at these distributions is also that it helps to marry the press reports that you read about huge digital innovations in the regions. You know, you see the latest robots at fairs that you go to. And at the same time, when you look at official statistics, which focus on the average, well, it doesn't look so good, right? So here we see that there is a small share of firms in light gray in the Central and Eastern Europe that dedicates more than 50% of their investments to R&D, right? There are these high-tech firms in the data, right? It's just that on average they get dragged down by all those firms that invest very little in R&D and digital. Now I wanted to come to 2 slides on foreign-owned firms. Obviously, we all know how important foreign ownership, FDI, was for the region in terms of technological transfers and provision of funding. And I want to show you to what extent we see this here in the data and to what extent it actually seems to relate to the fact that they are foreign-owned or to the fact that they just have different characteristics for domestic firms. So again, you have got very similarly constructed charts here, not anymore comparing the US with the Northwest and the Eastern Europe, but in this case, we compare within Eastern Europe, domestic and foreign-owned firms, right? We compare the R&D investments and we compare the novelty of innovations. And what you see is that there isn't really that much difference between domestic and foreign-owned firms, although you could say that if you look at R&D investments, the share of foreign-owned firms that has invested very little in R&D is a bit lower than for the domestically owned firms. You see that the dark blue bar is a bit smaller for the foreign-owned than for the domestically owned firms on the left. And also when you look on the right concerning the novelty of innovations, you could say that the share of firms, of foreign firms that did not innovate in the preceding year is smaller than the share of domestic firms that has not innovated in the year preceding our interviews, right? So on balance, you could take this as an evidence that foreign-owned firms appear more innovative, and when we throw this into the econometric machinery, these results actually, these differences are actually significant. However, the differences appear to have very little with to do very little with the mode of ownership, right? With where the owner sits. But what seems to be responsible for the differences is that the foreign-owned firms are larger and that they are primarily present in manufacturing and services, which tend to be more research-intensive than construction and infrastructure. So once we make a comparison that compares similar foreign and domestically owned firms, so of similar size, similar age that work in the same sector, the differences basically disappear in terms of R&D investments and also in terms of innovativeness, and they just remain a bit, and I haven't shown this to you, in terms of digital technologies that they use. So now I wanted to conclude with 2 slides relating to the shortages of skills and venture capital, and the shortages of risk capital. And the reason is that obviously Francesca, with her analysis, proposes a lot of products in which firms could diversify if they wanted to. And Thomas has also already talked about the shortages of skills. Now, the point on shortages of skills that I wanted to make is a very specific one. And what I'm showing you here is just a certain slice through a survey that Eurobarometer did 1-2 years ago on the reasons for choosing your host country if you are intending to move abroad to work there. Right? And I'm showing you this in dark blue on the left-hand side. I'm showing you the answers in dark blue on the left-hand side for the region and in light gray for the northwest part of Europe. So obviously, higher salary, and to earn a higher salary is the primary motivation for picking your destination country if you live in Eastern Europe and want to move abroad. But it's not just that, right? There's also the lifestyle, there's also country culture, and there's a secure and politically stable environment, which also serves as an attraction for migrants. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is emigration is not a given, right? I think there's a case for a broad set of social investments and improvements in the institutional infrastructure that can attract, that can encourage people to stay at home. And here I'm even conditioning these are just the results for those who have got at least a post-secondary qualification. So these are the guys you really want to keep in your country. That's on migration. It's not just a given. Even though the population projections that Thomas showed were very depressing, right? But they are not a given. I think there are policies with which we can affect them. On the right-hand side is just a well-known absence or near absence of risk capital in the East, which of course is not conducive to implementing innovations. Yes, please, Birgit.
Clarification: the people from Northwest Europe, they mostly move away because they love the country culture of another country more?
That's exactly what it says. They do not go for the reason. They do not go for. I mean, you move maybe to Switzerland from Germany, right? But to get on a higher salary, but that's about it. Maybe Luxembourg, but that's otherwise it's more the. These are people. It's a mixture of people who want to go for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, right? But not necessarily permanently. So this is also about gaining professional experience for a few years after having taken a degree, for example. It's not for eternity. Just to summarize, apart from the 2 key messages, right, that the economies are getting more innovative, but that everybody else is getting more innovative as well. So becoming more innovative in itself does not yet mean that the region is converging to the West. Apart from those 2 key points, on foreign ownership, I mentioned, I didn't go too much into the role in the provision of finance, but I think that's clear from the FDI statistics. But on average, these foreign firms, they are not significantly more productive and more innovative than domestically owned firms, right? And I can make that message a bit subtle later on if we've got time. Then on skills we discussed already. Risk finance is one. I think that's also, of course, at the heart of a development bank like the EIB, for whom I'm working. So the issue here is small scale, poor liquidity, and very few diversification opportunities for investors. And each of those factors determines the other, right? If you've got few diversification opportunities, you're not going to come as an investor to the market. So the market remains small. It has poor liquidity. If a market remains small, naturally, if there are relatively few diversification opportunities when it comes to a market that is so heterogeneous and highly risky, like venture capital, for example. So here there is a real case for public intervention, I think, and this is not new because, as you know, at least among venture capital, the volumes that are being financed there is a very large share that's already being financed with public funds. And overall, I think even though there are many specific policies we can think of fostering innovation, and for example, tax deductions is a very popular one shouldn't neglect the importance of the general business environment and also of the environment, of the quality of the institutions, of the quality of life in facilitating innovations, in part by retaining sufficiently skilled staff. Thank you very much.
So thank you to all presenters for the very interesting presentations and for keeping the time. That leaves us some time for discussion. And while you collect your thoughts, let me just briefly summarize. So we found out that the economies in CESEE have to explore new options because we have this slowdown in catching up and in productivity. So we have to redirect towards new products, maybe also new service activities. The process, which didn't come out maybe from the presentations now, but if you read the reports, the process is ongoing, but it has to be intensified. And innovation for sure must become stronger. I think we agree here also with our keynote speaker. And financing for such activities has to improve, as you emphasized. And last but not least, the economies in CESEE must be attractive to workers. So the framework conditions must be in place. And this relates, as you said, to social infrastructure, to quality of institutions. And I would also add the environment to keep all this on a sustainable footing. And so I now open the floor for general comments, also more questions, also if you need more detailed information on the research that has been presented here, or just more general remarks. Yeah, I see. Maybe you could briefly introduce yourself, and then Franz, and then Thomas. Yeah, it's working.
It's
Just
working?
keep on.
Okay.
Yeah, carry on.
Thanks very much for all of your talks. They were very insightful, and they fitted very complementary together. I'm Katja Kalkschmidt. I'm from the Diplomatische Akademie Wien. And I came here because I'm a development economist, and I'm much into development and trade integration of Southern and Southern European economies. Yeah. My question is actually, or it's something that I want to drive the discussion as it is at the feasibility of achieving this transition for countries in Central and Eastern Europe and Southern Eastern Europe, and what policies would we need at the national or supranational sphere in order to make that work. So we had this issue with this smile curve that it's actually, you know, this step 3, that you call it production, that is the one that is having this low value added. Then we saw that we have this inverted smile because these countries that we're interested in here are actually focusing on this kind of production in there. And that's again what we saw in your speech too. Those are also the countries that are the most energy using, of course, because they are doing these production steps. So where should we move there, and how could we rearrange it? Also with this diversification and moving away to other product areas. So these steps, step 3, has to be there somehow. Somebody has to do step 3, otherwise the car will not be constructed, how carbon neutral a car may become or not. But we will have, the way that our production is now set up, has steps that are with more and less value added. So how should we rearrange that? How to not have in a world that has this slicing up of the productions across different countries, not having countries that are or end up with being stuck with less value-added production ways. So we have to think about that. We can think about that globally. How can we somehow redistribute it? We can think about it also within firms. Should we integrate again all production steps within one firm and then somehow get these things? So there are different ways to go, more market-based or more authority-based or policy-based. What do you think? Where should we go, or where should we start talking about this?
Thank you. Maybe we collect Franz.
Franz Nauschnig, Euro 50 Group. My question is, the catching up of Central and Eastern Europe was mostly based on integration in automotive industries in value chains. Now we have a problem that especially the German, but the whole of the European automotive industry, where the Eastern Europeans are integrated, they are facing the threat of Chinese competition in electric vehicles, which are the future. And my view is Europe has the danger. 10 years ago, Europe had 80% of a solar panel worldwide, the world market. Now we are still dominating the car market, but if this goes on and the Chinese competition, and China is really desperate to export a lot of EVs, because otherwise we will not achieve their growth targets and fall back into deflation. So we will really push. What happens if this push by the Chinese is successful and it destroys the German automotive industry, which it also destroyed the German and the European solar panel industry.
Thank you, Franz. And we take one more question in the round from Tomasz, so he has a microphone.
I'm still thinking about the monkeys jumping from one tree to another. So I'll make my best to phrase my question
in the forest.
so that I can make myself understood. But if we could go back to your presentation, or at least have it in front of our eyes, if I understood correctly, the key sectors, and it's actually the very same sectors in Eastern Europe and Northwestern Europe, that contribute most to GDP growth. In Central and Eastern Europe, they are less innovative, right? So the very first chart and a couple of the subsequent charts, they show that. Now, my question is this the problem, or the root of a problem, or is this the consequence, actually, among other things, a consequence of the smile curve and of the functional specialization trap? They simply are less innovative because they potentially, I mean, I'm just speculating or thinking out loud, but they haven't had to be more innovative so far, right? So they have a business model that has worked without innovation so far. So they could not be more innovative. They didn't have to be more innovative, possibly. And what's the outlook? Will they have to become more innovative, or do you think this can continue like this in future?
Okay, so there are a couple of tricky questions. Shall we start with the policy questions? So what is needed, which policies are needed, how to bring things to the ground, how to implement the structural change? Who would like to take this question? Jochen?
Yeah, I can have a try. I mean, on the policies, I think it depends on whether you're interested in promoting incremental change of the type that Francesca also showed in her analysis, where the innovative product is close to where the current specialities are, or whether you really want to move the region to ICT or something where the productivity difference to the West is much smaller, right? And I think for the incremental changes, personally, I think you can rely a lot on market forces, because we've got a push anyway that is driving at least not the high, not the speculative part of R&D, but the product testing and the product, the gradual product development that is moving from the Northwest to the East, and that's just happening for cost reasons, because the corresponding people are too expensive in the North and West. So despite skill shortages in the East, and despite rapidly higher salaries, they are still cheaper in the East. So we see companies moving that already to the East. So this type of movement, I think, will continue. So one doesn't have to, and I don't think you need big policies there to, and gradually I think production will become more innovative there. If you want to transfer the high risk type of and high return type of research to the East where it's not there so far, I think this is much trickier. Because at least when you think about in which areas this type of research thrives in the West, it's in clusters where you've got a combination of at least moderate levels of risk capital and university and relatively big markets. Munich, for example, where people have lots of opportunities when they move to, and firms active in research as well. And to transfer something like that, you need to transfer everything simultaneously to a new location, which is incredibly tough, right? And then, for example, in Slovakia, where you see when new research centers are being built, where these research hubs, if you like, with a couple of hundred people have been built, there wouldn't necessarily be at the moment enough staff around if you wanted to set up a new one to find the people other than taking them away from the existing research hubs. So the shortage for these big movements of entire research hubs, I think first it's very tricky because you have to move capital and get a good cooperation of universities and businesses going, and the firms and the people into a new location. It's very tricky, and then there might not just be enough staff in the regions. So definitely when you want to move into new technologies, I think the new sectors, then I think a classical instrument is tax incentives for R&D. That has also among the range of policy instruments has been shown as relatively effective relative to pure subsidies or whatever else you might want to imagine. So this is the policy I would recommend because it's well tried and tested. Whether it has to be 200 or 300% of the R&D expenditure is a different issue, but I mean the countries are already reducing that.
Francesca, you would like to add on this?
Yes, I'd like to point you to one study that we are about to, so I cannot point you actually because we will publish it, release it soon, but where we actually think of the policies that could help this switch, right? That exactly what you said, this functional specialization. And among the things we mentioned, there is certainly the idea of human capital, because when you put up a center, you need the people inside. But there is a lot of other things that will be necessary. Capital, a good institutional environment, but also I feel some strategic view, some prioritization. We cannot do everything at the same time. That's why when I do a long list, then somebody has to say, okay, this is where I want to go as a country, and therefore I shrink the list to these 5 things. And again, the idea, there are certain policies already in the EU that go into that direction. I'm a big fan of smart specialization policies that are actually trying to do exactly that, find that niche in terms of sectors and activities that can make a location unique and slowly changing the production structure so that what you say is exactly true. Nobody wants to do the production for all the industry and having no chance to do more value-adding activities. On the Chinese competition in electric car vehicles, I totally agree with you. We have another study now. I'm doing a lot of advertising for VE research, but we have another study where we are actually tackling the question of what is the future of clean tech industries when investments are mild, when we don't go all in, right? When we do a little bit here, a little bit there, but we don't really believe in it. And the risks are exactly what you say, that we will end up with another photovoltaic industry completely lost. Whether this is feasible, so what is feasible, then it's a very complex question that I think it goes beyond what we did in the study. And now there is Thomas' question that he cannot answer himself, so somebody has to answer that. Less innovative until now.
I think it was a bit of a hen and egg problem, right, that you posed.
Sort of,
Like,
yeah.
So if these industries in Central Eastern Europe are the ones where you are competitive, you are you can start. Are you competitive in
no,
these
yeah.
other products because you've been competitive there, or do you generate more competitiveness?
Yeah, when he was speaking, actually, the idea that I had, one of the possible things, insights that can help you jump on the next tree to keep the metaphor, is that one of the weaknesses of the product space is that the data used are export data, so we don't know what is actually the domestic content of that export. So that's why a country like Czechia all of a sudden looks like the star in the world because it's exporting a lot of the complex products. But what is it that Czechia adds to that product? We don't know. So we have in mind the idea of working more in this direction and try to contribute to this debate in the future with colleagues at VEVE. We don't have the answer, but I guess, and that's also related to what I was saying before, it's not a static picture, because if you think that products are continuously introduced, then it's not just about being more innovative in the things you are doing, but keeping an eye to the things you are not doing and thinking a new material, a new product, the new battery, whatever. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Well, thank you. I don't see any further questions, and there is opportunity, and we will have more also insightful discussion on the policy necessities and options in the panel discussion after the break. So I now invite you to a short refreshments outside.
Maybe
and
address the questions.
Excuse me, sorry, yeah, because you were sort of switching roles, but yeah, okay,
Yeah.
we give Thomas a chance to
confuse you.
Yeah.
No, I would start with Francis' question on the automotive industry, because this is an area that I worked on quite a bit, and I would like to say that I kind of disagree, or even totally disagree with what you're saying, and to a large extent what was said in the keynote. I think we don't need more protection and more subsidies. I think what we need is less regulation and more competition of technologies. And that would, from my point of view, also solve the problem, or to a large extent solve the problem, because what we have done, we have overwhelmed, to a large extent through our regulation, the car producers. And as I said at the very beginning, now we are waking up to the reality. And most of the people that talk about protection and subsidies, I think what they totally ignore is the demand side. So nobody really talks about the demand side and the fact that the electric car is simply for most consumers on the demand side an inferior product. So this is a problem. And since we have forced basically our traditional industry, car producers, to fare in both directions, basically, the combustion engine and the electric vehicle, we have simply overwhelmed them. This is my opinion. I know that this is
actually you are
this is a very red flag for many people. So, but I just wanted to say that. And if we have
half a minute, maybe, because we wanted to stop on time.
We can do it over coffee.
Okay, yeah. But okay. You are echoing actually Jeromin with the technology neutrality or openness to technology in what you said. And I invite you now to refreshments, a break, and then we have a very interesting policy discussion where we can bring in a lot of, especially also what you touched upon, issues still after the break. Thank you.
So good evening to everybody. Thank you very much for staying with us. So the last part of our seminar will focus on some further analysis from our speakers that I will introduce briefly. We will have some first round of questions, and then we will involve you as an audience to ask some other questions. So First of all, I think we have online participation. Yes, I see Milena Jaburkova, that is Vice President of the Confederation of Industry of the Czech Republic for the digital economy. She's acting, the association is acting as an umbrella of 36 associations and 170 members. She has been studying very much the EU competitive position in recent years and working for IBM. I think we have really a great occasion to ask some questions. And Milena, thank you for being with us online. And you will receive the first question from me very shortly. We have with us Professor Arnold Schuh, that is a professor at Vienna University of Economics and Business. We will have the occasion also to have a different point of view from economists, because he's more involved in business, administration and strategy. He's also director of the Competence Center for Emerging Markets on Central and Eastern Europe. On my left, Rima Rubczynskaite, that is a research fellow at Vilnius University, and I will leverage very much on her knowledge and her studies on the potential of the Green Deal for Baltic countries, but also for Europe in general. And then Susanna Zawarska, that is economist at the Vienna Institute for Economic Studies. I've read a couple of great papers from you. Thank you very much. It was very nice. And you've been in the past also advisor for the government office of the Slovak Republic, and you've been doing a lot of studies, which I read recently, on productivity and competitiveness. So thank you very much to the speakers. So I was announcing already that Milena will be the first to receive my question. So from you, Milena, I need some help to frame a bit the context. So 2 days ago, Draghi published a very relevant report that could set the agenda for EU. But he's never mentioning Central Eastern Europe. So he's mainly focusing on EU versus US versus China. So how Central Eastern European countries are fitting into the picture, and how much they're affected by the general competitive position of the European Union in general.
Thank you, Matteo. For first question, thank you for the invitation. I apologize for my squeaking doors voice. I'm currently suffering with COVID at home, and I'm very sorry not to be in Vienna personally, because to touch up upon context, I have very personal connection to Vienna. My father used to work there as Czech ambassador to Austria, as well as director of diplomatic Academy of Vienna. And my daughter lives there and studies art at Viennese University. But there is also a very important contextual link between Vienna and Central Eastern European countries, because, and you can see the Freitags map of Austro-Hungarian Empire, that was in fact a prototype of single market, the early single market where ideas, people, talents, innovation, without border, stunned the world by Schumpeter, by Freud, by Mahler, and by entrepreneurs, which created backbone of our industry, like Emil Skoda, Franz Ringhofer, Loren and Clement. So that's why it's so important for me to be able to talk Central Eastern European talk. And Draghi didn't mention the Central Eastern Europe. He will learn, I hope. But the president of the European Commission, when she was at the GlobSec at Prague, she mentioned Central Eastern Europe. And I will quote, "The new reality is that Central Eastern Europe, Central Europe is not only geographically at the heart of Europe, but it is also politically and strategically central for the future of the European Union." Last year, the biggest investors in this region were not German or French companies, but Czechs. Poland is one of Europe's most dynamic economies. Resilience of most Central European countries in the face of Russia's wars of aggression in Ukraine was and is remarkable. So when we talk about competitiveness, President of the Commission says, I think Europe's West has a lot of learn from the Europe's East. So that's also the context. And regarding to your question of the competitive position, yes, we have a lot of offer. We know the past when we were not part of the European Union, where we were, under occupation or under authoritarian regimes. And we also know what is now at stake at the geopolitical, in the current geopolitical situation. And yes, we have to have on our minds that we are interestingly, tied into the EU competitiveness. And due to our experience, there is a lot of what we can offer. And majority of Central Eastern European countries are middle-sized or smaller economies. This means they do not have large domestic consumer base, and they rely on export inside, outside the EU as the key economic drive. And to avoid middle income trap, here it's obvious we have to build, and it's repeated again and again, high value added economy, focus on exporting, on final products. And how to achieve that? In order to move upwards on the ladder, our economy needs to, and it's also no-brainer, intake technologies like quantum, AI, chips, hydrogen, use them in transforming its industrial base, because it's very important, this transformation, for our resilience. Develop as well defense sector, especially focusing on dual use. Invest into research and development and ensure enough on-skilled workforce, attracting international talents, improve education system, reskill and upskill. But it's easier said and done. And here I will touch upon Draghi's report. Nationally, let me start with nationally, we need the political, it's very, very difficult. We need political representation that sees behind one political cycle. They are courageous enough not to just talk the talk, how high these things like education and research are on their priorities, but to walk the walk and invest in them factically. For example, via tax deductions for companies. And this is not happening in our country. At the EU level, and there we are in line absolutely with Draghi's report, decrease regulatory burden. Instead of producing another regulatory storm, especially in technology and digital area, we need to digest existing acts. We need to remove inconsistencies, overlaps, conflicting requirements, and because this regulatory burden is really killing European industry. We did a short survey, and majority of our companies do not think of employing significantly AI because they are afraid of regulation and legal uncertainty. Another thing very important, and Draghi also mentions that, is conclude a single market. Because here is this issue, barriers in single market and services are the same in services as 20 years ago. And in digital technologies, they are increasing because every state, implements its regulation according its own wishes. So we have 27 regulatory regimes. I will mention something which is not very surprisingly in Draghi's report, which is employ ambitious trade policy. As I said, we are export economies, open economies, so we have to focus, how to make trade more effective, how to attract, investment, how to compete at international trade scene. So, and when you're looking into what's in Draghi report, there is a lot of, in our opinion, heavy-handed interventionism. And we believe that better is focus on enabling environment for entrepreneurship and innovation instead, of these interventions. But we'll study it deeply, and then we'll come up with some more detailed analysis and opinions. And of course, focus on technology, it's there. But also what we need, and that's my last point, is we have to work with the best reliable strategic partners, because our adversaries, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, are working together and build resilience instead of sovereignty. So that's sorry for being long, but I'm not there, guys. So
thank you.
I took this opportunity. Okay, sorry.
Thank you very much, Milena, for the answer. And I like also the comparison with the single market with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. I always compare as well the capital market union that is happening only in Central Eastern Europe, where you have banks present in 10, 15 countries, which is not happening in Western Europe, where the banks are really very local and country specific. So it's a very nice area to test these concepts. Now, the second question is for Susanna. You've been working a lot on industrial policy and competitiveness. I pick up the concept that was developed by Thomas in his presentation. He was showing an interactive chart with potential growth. We see a slowdown in all the countries, and we see productivity growth slowing down in Central Eastern Europe. So that's a key fact. Is this happening everywhere in Europe? So more or less is a general trend of advanced countries, or should we be very worried about Central Eastern European trends in productivity?
The microphone is on. Yeah, great. Well, I think that's a very important question, because it is a stylized fact that, especially in the late 2000s, we start to see somewhat of a, we start to see somewhat of a slowdown in productivity growth across most parts of the advanced world and European countries in particular. And I think, there's a rather broad literature on things called the productivity puzzle, which is that basically academics are having a hard time understanding why we are seeing this deceleration of productivity growth rates. And there's various factors being mentioned, like measurement issues, labor market factors, and so on. But I would tend to argue that even though it is maybe a general trend across Europe, it matters more for Central Eastern Europe, and then there are also Central Eastern Europe specific reasons why it's happening in our region. In terms of why it matters, well, of course, the obvious reason would be that there is still a large productivity gap between Central Eastern Europe and most advanced parts of European Union. So, for example, even the most developed country in terms of productivity, which will be Slovenia or Czechia, is only at about 70% of the productivity rate of Germany, for example. And so it's a very similar discussion to what we have in development economics about premature deindustrialization, one where countries are experiencing a shrinkage in their industries at a level which is detrimental to their development process versus one which is natural after a certain point.
Are we already there in terms of risk, or there is more catching up in the next years?
Well, so we still have, the Central Eastern European countries still have a productivity growth rate which is above that of EU. So there is still room for convergence. But what we see particularly after 2008 is that the gap is narrowing, and that really points to the limitations in terms of future convergence. In terms of the CEE specific reasons of why it might be taking place, I think this is already, quite well summarized in the previous session as well. And that is basically a graduation from a previous sort of growth model, which the region has been undergoing. So following the EU accession especially, it was very much based on sort of chasing low-hanging fruits in the sense of foreign direct investment coming in and gaining quite a lot of the productivity boost from novel technologies, but also novel ways of organizing a production process and so on. And so that allowed for a rather fast pace in productivity growth. But afterwards, now these countries are at a level, and I think the previous speakers have mentioned that as well, is that now the switch that needs to happen is going from sort of production capacity to innovation capacity, and that happens a lot less automatically, and that's where policy really needs to step in. So I think from the convergence going forward, it will much more depend on how successful this policy environment can be.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm happy to hear that anyway some catching up is still going on. Yep. The countries are behaving quite well in terms of economic growth still, but it's good time to think about the future. So I think it comes really a good moment, this discussion. So the next question is for Arnold. You were visiting a lot of companies in the region rather recently. Some of them are excelling in their field, and you were analyzing more their different strategies to navigate international competition. So looking more at the strategies of the companies instead of the only macro picture. So what did you find in terms of strategy, and which are the companies that are excelling? So we try to a little bit not to speak about the single countries, but more on the single companies and single strategies.
Yes, we started with it let's say in the 2000s, in the mid of the 2000s, yeah, because after 10, 12 years doing research on Western multinationals going east, yeah, we said it's time now to turn the perspective and find out how did local companies survive, and what new companies did come to the markets. And so we started a project called Local Heroes, and we identified 60 companies in different countries of the region, and then tried to figure out what are their competitive assets, what is their competitive advantage, and what are their strategies. So maybe first, before you start with such an exercise, you have to find out what is a local company. Yeah? And I think that's the first thing that you have to do. You have to say, okay, local company is a company that is operating in one of those markets, but they are foreign companies, or foreign-owned companies, and they are locally owned companies. And okay, let's forget all about the mixtures, yeah? But that's the point. And then when you move to the local companies, you have state-owned companies or state-controlled companies. You have business groups. Yeah? Just think of Agrovert, former Czech Prime Minister, Mr. Andrzej Babis, yeah? I think this is a group, I mean, you just have to think about this, 150 companies, yeah? And they are a very strong player in agriculture, chemicals, media, yeah? Because when you have the money, when you're a little oligarch, you also try to buy some media company, yeah? So that's quite usual in these countries. You have Syriac Group, for instance, in Romania, yeah? So some of you, the older ones, know that this was the coach of Boris Becker, and he invested his company in car distribution, car dealerships, real estate, insurance, banking, whatever. And you find a lot of these companies. Okay, are these the companies we're looking at? Then you have startups. Okay, let's forget startups for a while. Not so interesting from my point of view, because you don't know if they still exist after 5 years. And our research is based on some continuity. Yeah? I'm not saying that research in startup is, of course, very important. I'm not saying it's not important, but we were looking at companies that had at least 100 people employed, had 25% of at least international revenues or share of international sales, no state, no major state stake, and so on. And it was a nice group, so covering everything from consumer products, business to business products, and we highlighted then two sectors, pharma and ICT software, yeah. And the reason was when you looked at it over 3 years and looked at the return on sales, and this was the years 2013 to 15, then the outcome was that the highest return on sales could be found in ICT. So it was on average in this group, I mean, this is not representative, it was 16%, for instance. That's a lot, 16% return on sales. This is quite good. It was a little bit lower for pharma, and then below 10%, I think it was below around 10% for the others. And of course, these were selected successful companies. Yeah? And then we looked at two types of strategy. One strategy was, I called it hybrid strategy, because a pure cost advantage or cost leadership strategy didn't exist in this group. Yeah? You cannot just be the cheapest without having any other features in your strategy. Yeah? So typically it is combined with branding, it's combined with something that you do better than just being the cheapest. Yeah? So we called it then good value for money. This is a strategy that you can find everywhere. Yeah? You find it even in ICT services. Yeah? Why did Austrian banks, German banks go to Poland, went to Asseco or Converged and said, okay, please, let's do the software development with you? Yeah, because they are cheaper. Yeah? I mean, they were 30, 20% cheaper than at least than what they charge in Germany. So that was their entry. Yeah? So, but it was a combination. Of course, you needed closeness to customers and of course, innovativeness and so on. And the other one was, we called it focus and niche strategy. Yeah? So this was a very specific niche. You would call it probably hidden champion, if you have heard. This is a group of companies which is just focusing on a very specific niche market and then tries to internationalize. So the growth comes from internationalization, not for covering other product categories. And this is very smart when you have a competitive advantage, when you are small, yeah, because you can somehow control this. And the only thing that you really have to control is to grow with your customers along this international line. And again, we found now I have to look this up. We found that the return on sales was 16% for the niche strategy and 10% for the hybrid strategy, as we called it.
And most of these countries are serving Western companies.
That's another point. That's another good point. I mean, there are many points, because when you do this type of analysis, yeah, more qualitative analysis, you find out more than you ask as a question at the beginning. Yeah. So the first thing that you learn is we distinguish in strategic management between country-specific advantages and firm-specific advantages. You have a country-specific advantage when you have a lower cost. I mean, the classic country-specific or region-specific advantage is educated workforce, talented workforce at a lower cost. That's it. You can find it everywhere. Yeah, you can find it everywhere, even in ICT. Yeah? So you are offering something cheaper. But that's not enough, yeah? Because this advantage can shrink, middle income trap. Yeah? So you get richer, you are not so cheap anymore, and then you're running in a differentiation problem. Yeah? So, so you have to find firm-specific advantages. Yeah? So this is something that is somehow unique to you. Yeah? And the best example is, for instance, antivirus companies. I even wrote a case study about this. You found 4 global players in the antivirus industry that came from Central Eastern Europe. That's Avast, Czech Republic, Asset, Slovakia, Bitdefender, Romania, and Kaspersky, Russia. Okay, later one we know. It's a little bit difficult for them now, yeah? But anyway, out of 10 global players, we had 4 from this. So this was, I mean, I was jumping on this, yeah? And we were covering them and were saying, what was the reason, yeah, for them? So this is this group, and the other group, so it depends, is the competitive advantage transferable or not? That's the point. Is it just something that you have in your own country, yeah? So you have a certain beverage that only the locals drink and nobody else. Mm-hmm. How is it called? The Czech Coke?
Tony?
Huh? Kofola.
Yeah, Kofola. Or is there a chance to export it? I mean, from Czech to Slovakia and maybe a little bit to Poland and Austria and so on. Yeah? So that's one thing. And with antivirus software, that went very well. So just to make it short and give the others a chance, the other strategy that was very interesting is a regional one. So we had the regional strategies in the retailing, consumer goods, and so on. Just look at Warsaw Stock Exchange listed companies like CESEE, Intercars, LPP. Yeah. Okay, probably that doesn't tell you a lot, but LPP is a retailer for clothing. Yeah, it's like H&M or Zara Group. I mean, they copied the model and have these different brands. Yeah, CCC is started with shoes. Yeah, so we had it in Austria too. This very interesting. Intercars, the biggest car parts retailer in Central Eastern Europe, present in 13 countries. Yeah, I mean this is a group where they grow in CE. And I just have now one student working on a topic because there's one that is interesting me. Why do those companies not enter Western Europe? And that brings me
You have the answer or not yet?
That brings me back to Milena, yeah, which said there's no single market. Yeah, what are the reasons? Yeah, and the point is, we said, what did we offer to the Central Europeans? We gave them free access to the rich market of a rich single market. Yeah, and then I asked my students, okay, what do you think? How easy it is for a Slovak furniture producer to enter the large European market? Yeah, it's a huge potential, but the point is nobody is asking how shall this, let's say, small Slovak furniture producer find customers and enter this market. Yeah. So, I mean, there are many different aspects, but the point is, and I'm coming from business strategy, is you need a competitive advantage. Yeah. Very often we had a comparative advantage. You switched suppliers, an Austrian and German and an Italian supplier, for a Slovak, Polish, because they were cheaper. Yeah? Okay, that's how you get into the global value chain or in a global value chain. But is this a defendable position? Yeah, that's the big question. Is there anything that they can offer in addition that's interesting for the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, to keep them?
Car makers.
So, but okay, I better stop here.
No, thank you very much for this bottom-up approach, looking at the companies. Right. This was very interesting. And Rima, next question is for you. So about the Green Deal, it was briefly touched, but we were not going deeper. So when we speak about competitiveness, there are, I would say, two different concepts. One is the general competitiveness of a nation, sort of productivity. And the other one that is mentioned very much in the Draghi report is the security, the autonomy, EU autonomy and security. How do you see the Green Deal interacting on these two dimensions? And if this is a problem for Central Eastern European companies? We do a survey in EIB, and we see that Central Eastern European companies are much more concerned about the green transition, while we see that, for instance, Austrian companies, they see more as an opportunity rather than a risk. It's completely opposite in Central Eastern Europe.
Thank you for the question. First of all, hello everybody. I am from Lithuania, Vilnius University. And I first would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here in this panel. So regarding the Green Deal and competitiveness, so if I ask every one of you what competitiveness means for you, I think we will receive very different answers. And I was doing research for my PhD, and I looked on clusters, and I looked at first works of Michael Porter, who is an author of competitiveness paradigm. And mainly he's speaking about productivity, export, and let's say innovation. So when you combine all these three, so for the CESEE countries, I think the problem is all three. So all the three. So, and when you put in this Green Deal, which requires technological change and a lot of things, so it's a huge problem. We've done research with a team at strategic analysis centers of the Lithuanian government a few years back, and we looked at, okay, what do we have in these greenhouse gas emissions for sectors in Lithuania? Are they labor intensive? Are they productive? And all other things. And what we saw, it's very disappointing. But at least 3 sectors in which are energy and transport are labor intensive and of low productivity. So, and they
also energy intensive as well.
Yeah, also energy intensive as well. And the biggest disappointment was that it's about more than 30% of labor works here. They produce gross value added also like 25-30%. And the greenhouse GHG, so greenhouse gas emission, are the highest. So that's why the problem could be.
So your main concern is that, for instance, for Lithuania, but this is true for other countries, is positioned on the wrong, let's say, sectors.
Yes, and these sectors, let's say, competitiveness in global world are downstreaming. So the trend is downstreaming. So it's also a concern. Sorry. So the problem is there. And just last week news, we have a big manufacturer in Lithuania, Achema, and they were offered a subsidy from European Commission to change some technology to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And but European Commission insisted on some let's say technical adjustments, and company refused more than 100 million euro subsidy because it told, at least for the press, that it will be not economically effective, and it require twice as much investments. So they cannot do this, and I think this is only the example for Lithuania, but I think there are a lot of cases in all.
There's a big need for transitioning, but it's very hard to do that.
Yeah, very hard to do, and technologies, at least for some sectors, are still perhaps not for manufacturers, for big manufacturers to adopt. That's the main point. And I would like to reflect on previous section about this product space, because we've done some research. It's about innovation. We've done some research with my colleague at Vilnius University, and we looked at Baltic states. And the question for our research, when does the new complex entry happens, and what are the factors behind this? And at least for small open economies, what we've seen that R&D expenditure matters, and mostly what surprised us that government R&D expenditure matters more for new entries in these more complex areas. And it's perhaps not surprisingly, because business R&D expenditures, I think, in all CESEE countries are still low.
Okay, so there is room to complicate the analysis with at least R&D variables.
Yeah,
that's very good.
And one more regarding EU policies. When the smart specialization started in Lithuania, implementation of it, Actually, sorry, Francesca, I am not a big fan because there are small open economies. They are still developing, let's say. They are still catching up. What you are doing with smart specialization, you are putting a cap, putting few holes and say, okay, these few plants will grow and then others not. So that's a very bad thing for small open economies. I think for small open economies it's more important to be technology neutral, let ideas grow. And we have few very good examples. Let's say we have previous fermenters, which is now a part of Thermo Fisher Scientific. The US came and bought a Lithuanian company, which, let's say for 20 years was developing very specific products for genetic research. Another example could be nanoavionics company, which is also invested from US, and they produce small satellites. And perhaps, I don't know, perhaps the auditorium will know better, Vinted, which is also developed in Lithuania, idea and the business model. And also we have in finance space, we have this Revolut, which is also quite known. And it started its activity and developed this model in Lithuania. So Lithuania is quite successful in some things. And perhaps the newest one, which received a funding from Horizon Europe, is one of the company I consulted some time ago. And I'm very proud of it, but it's like, it will do robotic surgeries on your
skin?
No. No. I on your vascular problems. But it will operate in distance. So you'll be in one place, and you feel you will be like a surgical employee, and you can do from distance. And they just had clinical trials, successful clinical trials, and this product also comes to the market. So what I think about CESEE region and Lithuania is just an example that we do have a lot of good ideas, but we do not need a lot of a lot of small priorities. Let us grow, let develop us the ideas, and it would be the better policy. That's why the Draghi's report resembled my thoughts a bit, because yes, we do not have a single market in the European Union. Yes, the companies I worked with and had innovative product, they do not come to Western countries because there is a high market barriers. Where do they go? They go to Saudi Arabia, to other to less developed regions, and they offer their products, be it cybersecurity, be it some information communication technologies companies for health industry and so on.
So there is like an invisible barrier in the Iron Curtain that the companies are not going to the West, but Revolut could do that.
Yes, but the difference a little bit, if it is in digital economy, if it is a digital product, it's a little bit different.
Right. And so the single market there is working a bit more. So to have 500 million clients, but for the rest, no.
But for the rest, it's difficult.
Okay.
So it's so that's I perhaps elaborate
a little. Very bad
bit.
outcome, but very interesting to hear.
Yeah. So regarding this Green Deal, as I would say, Lithuania now is doing a lot, but let's say for the Baltic countries, there are two main problems. It is not connected. Energy systems are not connected to Western countries, so we do not have how to. We produce a lot of, let's say, at one moment, a lot of energy. We do not have where to put it, so and so on. So, and another thing, let's say, still the three Baltic countries do not have a railway to the Western countries.
Right.
So there is a huge connection problem, and this also matters for the economies to grow up. So. perhaps that's all I wanted to say, and I wait for
Thank you
questions.
so much. So maybe I will open the floor to the public, then maybe I have other questions later, but if you have any other questions for our speakers, I think it's a very good occasion. As you can see, they cover a very broad spectrum of knowledge and countries.
Yes, thank you. My name is Uwe Wixer from German Embassy here in Vienna. And I should add that I worked many years for German Ministry of Economy and Finance, especially in the time when the common market was elaborated, and also when we had the German unification, where I find some of these problems or adaptation processes quite similar to what is now happening to the CEE countries. I want just to add another, if you allow me to further complicate the discussion, another aspect. Looking back to those times I mentioned, internal market, and after then following this process, globalization, it was always a time where there was expansion of economic activities, especially for exporters. And nowadays, we observe by geopolitics, in my view, a sort of fragmentation of markets. So we have blocks, economic blocks. And you see this by creation of the BRICS states, for example, which are then probably having their own system and not operating quite freely with the West anymore, from currency to export tariffs and other things. So how do you see this as a threat compared to further processes, former processes of development? And or do you think that the Western economies will be so resilient to this that they in itself have enough market development opportunities? And also, I think what should be discussed maybe is that even within countries, especially in Western Europe, we have now, of course, another political situation that some of the parties that gain a considerable amount of votes are not so free to open furthermore to the Western world, especially to the US, rather than orienting to other markets. How do you assess this? Is this a threat to our development, or is this just negligible? Thank you.
So if I can reframe a bit, it's in the initial part of the Draghi report, there are some discontinuity that are mentioned. One of these is the geopolitical fragmentation, energy prices, and a couple more. So this is one, he's saying the world has changed, take action. So the question would be if Central Eastern European countries are a possible victim of this fragmentation more than other countries. I don't know who wants to pick up the question quickly.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Sorry, and I think that's one of the most important questions. Because everything we are debating here is sort of, it's losing its colors vis-a-vis geopolitical situation. And I think the creation of BRICS was not the most important game changer. The most important game changer was the war in Ukraine, which shifted geopolitical balance. So we may be well, and you refer to political situation in many of our countries in 1938. If the situation will develop as in 1938, it's upon us and upon resilience of the EU and on the collaboration with democratic countries and partners such as US, Japan, Korea, Israel, etc. So that's something very important where we have to foster our strategic collaboration. Because what we learned from this situation is that there is nothing like a free lunch. Because, you know, if we, and that was one, you know, you cannot have without anything free energy, free sources, free resources, free products. So we learned very hard way, and we as Central European countries, we warned the EU about this risk. And the other things we learned is that friend in need is a friend indeed. So when there is someone who can stand by you in the time of the crisis or problems, this is good partner. And the other one is united we stand, divided we fall. So we have to work with those strategic partners, to outwit those autocracies that are trying to destroy this world-based, rule-based order, which was here since the end of Cold War and maybe Second World War. So that's a crucial time we have, and we have adapted to it as a businesses, as a citizens, and as a political entities.
Okay, thank you very much, Milena. The Draghi report is mentioning also the need of economic foreign policy. So it's in a different way, you need to have a foreign policy that is connected with the economics, with the rare materials and many other issues related to the supply chains.
And he mentions defense.
And defense, of course, yes.
And
yes,
he mentioned that.
Is the controversial part on defense as well. I saw...
maybe if I can
yes,
just jump on
Susanna,
that. Yeah, I mean, so just 3 points regarding that. Firstly, I think the position of Central Eastern European economies is, having foreign investment as such a dominant driver of their economies, it really leaves them in a position of basically dependent market economies. So basically, their future competitiveness is very much in the hands of the headquarters. So, it's very much a question of European competitiveness at large. But at the same time, I think what we have quite a lot of discussion recently is this question of nearshoring, whether the creation of these geopolitical blocks might actually be stimulating more and more of a investment boom in these countries as countries start to prefer, or companies start to prefer, investing in closer locations. And there's also this concept of friendshoring, of locating in...
But Susanna, which is prevailing of the two? The friendshoring, so an advantage for Central Eastern Europe, or just disruption of trade relationships?
Well, I think this an interesting paper which came out by the International Monetary Fund quite recently, and what they find is that there has actually been a boom in the so-called non-aligned countries, or the third countries, which are those who kind of continue to play on both sides. So, the Hungaries and the Serbias in Central Eastern Europe, where actually they are getting quite a lot of the investments, say, from the countries like China, to circumvent the tariffs and the other hurdles from the trade space that they have been facing. So I think it might not necessarily be a bleak picture for Central Eastern Europe from this nearshoring potential in the future, but I think it will take a long time to actually see that in the data, but it will be an interesting time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I've seen another question, yes? Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
Just to jump on that conversation, it might not only affect integration on the production side from, also getting into that sourcing, but also on the potential of being integrated in or having access to markets, to consumer markets. And the one idea that I got here with this geopolitical rivalry aspect now is that after maybe we can talk about Lithuania again. So when China put on the trade sanctions on Lithuania in December 2021, we were expecting a decrease in this trade. So when I looked at the sea shipping from Klaipėda, what I saw is that actually quite in the short term, there was a rapid increase in its trade. And then when you looked at it, you looked at that the EU was somehow, getting into action and was filing a complaint at the WTO for these discriminatory trade issues. And what we actually saw is that the EU, somehow encouraged the other EU countries to increase the demand for Lithuanian products in electronics and laser and what so on. So there was some kind of substitution going on. I was just wondering, and I want to put that through you back. So can these geopolitical disputes somehow help us to decrease the market entry barriers for Central and Eastern European companies to gain access to more of the Western markets? Or don't you see that? Or how was your idea of, did you see that too, that substitution going on? So because China was not only punishing direct imports from Lithuania, but also from other imports from other countries that were sourcing from Lithuania, like many German ones.
Mainly if this geopolitical tension is favoring Central Eastern Europe, breaking a little bit this invisible barrier that we were mentioning.
But we were talking, yeah. What effects do you see there are potentials for reducing these barriers?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's true. But the question is how long it will last. That's that demand. But Lithuania, as all other Baltic countries, we have a break from Soviet Union. We got independence. We did not have at the time energy resources. The blockage was there. Even the food was a problem sometimes. So then we transitioned little by little to market. Then we had this 1998 crisis also, then 2000 crisis, then a global financial crisis. So I think companies somehow managed to look further. But if you look at the data, at least in our last paper, we've done on economic synchronization of the Baltic states. There are two concerning, let's say, me facts, that the Baltic states' economic cycle is different from the whole EU if you compare. So downtowns and increase in economic activities do not synchronize. That means that all monetary policy decisions have a different effect in these countries. And only the tool remains is fiscal policy, so which not always goes in line. So that's one problem. And on the companies, I would say depends on the micro scale. If you look at the companies, what they are doing, they are trying to survive. And when you look at the trade data, at least till 2019, our main trading partner for the, let's say, as I recall, for the 20 years period, the main trading partner was Russia. So when the war break, you should have to do something. So, and I'm happy that the Lithuanian government and the companies done something to, to turn the train to other directions. So, and one more thing, all Baltic countries are in monetary union. Not all CESEE countries are in monetary union, and it's a little bit of barrier of trade, I think. And at least for the Baltic states, we looked, does the trade matters more for economic synchronization with other European Union countries, or does the monetary union? And we found that monetary union mattered the most, at least for the period we investigated.
Same currency.
Same currency, yeah, because there is there are no currency fluctuations. It's better to do sales, to predict the returns sales and returns you will get, and so on. So there are a lot of macro, I think, factors, but there are a lot of strategic factors that perhaps my panel.
A funny thing, because I was advisor on for a master thesis on exactly this Lithuanian-China trade conflict, because I found it so interesting. Yeah, and it was initiated by a value-based foreign policy. Yeah, so everybody was shocked because we looked at it from a crisis management perspective and from a political, let's say, a theory perspective, how to deal with these cases. And then we had a kind of case study on the developments on the foreign trade and investments. And of course, you saw that this stopped, yeah, because what the Chinese did, they declared the customs numbers invalid, so you couldn't export anything anymore from Lithuania. Yeah, and the investments went down, and then there's always the question: so what was the substitution effect? Because the reason was this, that they allowed Taiwan to open a representative office under the name Taiwan and not Taipei in Vilnius, I assume. Yeah? So that was the reason. In the meantime, it faded out, but it was interesting. My student couldn't get any interview partners except journalists, representatives of industry associations, and so on. For instance, and there was one group that was affected because the case is interesting because there was not a very, let's say, close trade relationship. Yeah, so the only let's say marked let's say flows were imports from China, but that's everywhere, and they were not really dented. They were slightly dented, but Lithuanians continued importing Chinese products because probably you are somehow dependent. Taiwan couldn't make up for it. That was too small. Then they had these pledges. We have an innovation or investment funds. So it was about laser. There were a few laser companies that were affected. And coming to this point, coming to the point is how did they react? They immediately started to export via their neighboring countries. And so you had an open market that was grateful. The foreign companies, Continental and so on, who had production in Lithuania, they stopped communicating. They didn't want to be somehow related with it, and no way to find out anything about it, because they couldn't export them. So I think the whole thing faded out, and today, without declaring any defeat or victory, this anti-coercion act by the European Union was very important, because it showed that when you're a small country and have a lot of partners, then you even can defend yourself against a giant like China. So Zettelmeier was right when he said that this was one of the best things that the EU made in the last year. So funny that you brought up this.
Is there any other question from the public?
Yeah, may I also react?
Yes,
may
Milena, yes, you can go on. In short, because we are close to the end.
Yeah, I'd like the very much question from the lady from the audience, and just two quick points. You are relating the difference between Central Eastern Europe and Western countries. So you are relating to geopolitical tensions. We are relating in danger of our countries. So that's motivate us. And also, I slightly wonder why external tension should make a single market more accessible. That must be one of the priorities of the EU and all the countries. And we, Central Eastern Europe, with our new commissioners, new commissions, we have to, support this goal. And maybe due to our pressure, it's already again on the agenda as competitiveness itself, because it was not in last Commission's program.
Right. Thank you so much. Is there any other question from the public? We're ready to take. Okay, Jochen.
Thank you. Yes, to Herrn Jour, please. I was wondering, again, on the barriers in the internal market. You mentioned that some CE companies find it difficult, same topic. Some CE companies find it difficult to expand specifically within the EU to the Western markets. Can you expand a little bit on that and give perhaps the reasons that are most important? Is it the scale-up finance, which from the EIB's perspective I would like to know, but what is it?
It was a standard question that I used in my excursions in the last year. Every time I visited a company that was internationally operating, and I looked at it, and they had this pattern of Central Eastern Europe presence. Yeah? So you find all this by the way, they are very much hit. LPP lost 40% of sales, due to Russia and Ukraine. And by the way, there's a scandal now because they found out that they were delivering the merchandise to Russia under a different brand name and through an intermediary. So much about this, But this is enormous, because I was asking myself, when you look at the structure of those companies and you see that the Russia Belarus and Ukraine's share is something like 30%. How can this company survive? I mean, how does the crisis management work when you lose so much of your revenues? And in this case, they have retail outlets in those countries. I mean, they have assets in those markets that they abandon. Yeah. So that is the interesting part. And I still remember when I asked the CEO of Intercars. Yeah. And they said, he said, they're always asking me when I'm on a trade fair in Germany, when are you coming? Yeah. And he said, you have to wait, yeah, because the situation is this. Very often, these companies I'm talking about are retail industry. This is old economy, yeah. Let's put it this way, yeah. So you have oligopolistic situations in Western Europe, and when there is not a massive change in technology, yeah, it's very difficult to crack them. I mean, given the size, you are not a Chinese company who says, okay, whatever the price is, I pay it. Yeah, that's different. But with those companies, we are not. It's not in this case. So he said, but they don't know we are already with 300 million in those markets. But we don't talk about it, yeah, because they have a wholesale relationship too. So they are checking very carefully what is going on. What is happening when you are talking about expansion of CE companies? So one problem is that we identified is management quality. Yeah? So this relates to the normal company, and this relates even more to the high-tech companies. Yeah? So many of those companies were taken over by US companies, by the way. And I have to say that it makes sense for those companies to accept these deals. Yeah? Because first, it brings them the finance they need. Second, it brings them the network it needs. And third, it brings them the management. My Polish colleagues in Poznan, they are doing a research about biotech industry in Poland. And they say one of the main reasons why it doesn't work is that the management quality is poor. So when you reach running a 30 people company anymore, so you need other structures, you need different competencies. And that is something where these foreign managers come in and run it. Yeah. The other things is there's a lot of mistrust. So this is one of the legacies of communist times. So we have a lower level of trust in those countries. So what does this mean? Yeah? This means that you are not trusting other business partners. But especially in innovation and high tech, it's more partnerships, cooperation. Yeah? And therefore we have difficulties when there is this mistrust. The other thing that plays a role here is institutional quality. The more we go into this complex innovation, IP-based, so intellectual property-based, protection-based sectors, some people don't want to move in or move out, yeah, because they feel not safe. I mean, just think about a country in the east from Austria, where the whole problems that they have is that they have a regime that is contacting you and asking for a stake. And when I went to the university and said, where are your hidden champions? Yeah? I mean, you had so many of them. And they said, no, they don't want to get above 10 million. They are not interested in this. They don't want to be on the radar. Yeah? So we are dealing with things there that we cannot imagine here in Austria. Yeah? As by the way, as what Milena said, we can imagine how the fear of these people is resulting from the Ukraine-Russian war. My Poznan friends were totally in this array. Yeah? They were totally hectic when this happened, and this is still the case. So we are lacking the feeling of these people that are close to this war zone, yeah? And the priority that has for them. So that's, I mean, okay, now I'm deviated somehow, yeah, but coming back, I started with
maybe Milena wants to
information.
intervene.
I'm just closing it. I started with the information. Yeah. So you have to find out what is going on. Then it's the market structure, the oligopolistic market structure. Yeah. CESEE went into this market, lost money. Yeah. And left Switzerland, Austria with huge losses again. Yeah. And the other thing is, for instance, because I said it's the lower cost of good quality workers, the Entsendungsregeln, I have no idea how this is translated into English. Yeah? When they send people from Slovakia to Austria, they have to pay them the minimum.
Posting workers.
Pardon?
Posting workers.
Yeah, posting
workers.
Okay, where's your advantage? The advantage is gone. You take the advantage, and by the way, it's totally complicated. And as Milena said, these rules are interpreted in a very different way. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the problem.
You want Milena to add something?
Yeah, very quickly. I agree what was said. A lot of points you made were really good. The one thing is that the barriers at the single market, on the single market, are not only issue, East versus West. They are issue of all European businesses, and that's why we, in our umbrella associations, Business Europe, we really listed those barriers, and mainly they are emerging under existing regulation due to its complexity and inconsistencies and uneven interpretation among the member states, or in the absence of EU legislation where additional harmonized framework might be necessary. And this is why the European Union and new Commission should focus on that. And our friends in Business Europe estimate that removing those barriers would unleash 713 billion of euros by the end of 2029. So very important for entire EU, not East-West love-hate relationship.
Thank you so much. So last question, but I ask a very, let's say, quick answer. On the startup environment, so we have in our third paper that is going to be published in a few weeks, we focus on the VC capital as sort of, let's say, proxy for startup. And we see that Central Eastern Europe represents only 5% of total EU with VC capital. As we know, Europe is having a huge lag compared to the US, and Central Eastern Europe is particularly weak. If we look at the number of deals, we have around 11%. So Central Eastern Europe represents 11%. So numbers are small. In few words, do you see, especially as to you, do you see big potential there, or there is no hope that Central Eastern Europe will take off in the startup scene? So there is, because all the poles are London, Berlin, Paris, and there's no way for small dimension.
Yeah, but I see it's hard to say, but the problem is that these founders, and they are really good, yeah, they are looking for the best offer that they can get. And typically in the early stages, it's okay and fine when you have seed financing and it's local or national, on a national or even an EU base. Yeah? The problem starts when it's the scaling up, yeah? And when you have to finance the growth, and it seems that there we do not have the right instruments. And as I said before, yeah, it's not just a money issue. It's something that I say when I have a US investor, I can tap other markets. I can tap R&D skills, cooperate with others that can nobody offer me here in Austria, for instance. So we do not have a brain drain. We have also an innovation train, yeah? Because those companies that make it to a certain point, I just visited Nordeus, yeah, in Belgrade. Yeah, this is a mobile phone company, computer games for the computer games for mobile phones, sorry, and they were bought by a US company, yeah? And they are happy with it, yeah? Because they say we are fitting in their portfolio and they are offering us distribution systems that nobody here can offer. I mean, they were satisfied before, yeah, because they did a good job, so they were successful, but having this ambition to do something on a global scale, this is what you hear from these successful, let's say, startup entrepreneurs. They say people are satisfied when they say, I have my nice house, my car, my garden, and my family is fine, and that's okay. But the ambition to go further is not so, let's say, yeah.
So there are like many ideas, but it's very hard to scale up. This is true in general in Europe, but even more in some Central Eastern European countries. Even if we had fantastic example like Revolut or Bolt in Estonia.
Bolt, Vinted, for instance, is from Lithuania, I think.
Can I add a little bit, because I worked with startups like 7 years ago, and what I've seen, there are two sides. Let's say from startup companies, what I've seen. An example, we came to Luxembourg and they prepared pitching speeches, and what I see is that there is like VC inventors who want to invest 30, 40, 10 millions. And
to Luxembourg to meet who, the European Investment Bank?
So like from Japan and so on.
Ah, okay.
So, but the event was in Luxembourg.
Okay, okay.
And the Lithuanian, Estonian, other companies, I came with Lithuanian company, but I saw also the other Baltic, they ask for like 1 million, 2 million. So VC capitalists are not interested.
To small size.
Yeah, that's one problem. Another problem, they do not work enough on their pitch, and when they were asked what will be exit strategy for VC capitalists, they are not prepared to answer. So that's a competence problem, I think. And the other thing, what I've seen, venture capitalists from, let's say, they tend to invest in areas they know. They've done business in. They know the area, and that's the problem. If you are, let's say, like for the surgical robotic invention and so on. So if you do not know this area, you are afraid to invest.
Yep.
So that's also a problem. And I think in CESEE countries, there is a problem with this also.
Okay, thank you very, very much. Birgit, I think we are over. Fantastic. I wanted to thank all of you for attending this seminar. Once again, this is the cooperation with the three institutions, and you will find the 3 papers online that are going a bit deeper in the 3 topics that are mainly productivity. Trade is the second paper, and the third one is about innovation that is going to be published, and they fit very well with the current debate on EU level on European competitiveness. So thank you very much for attending, and I hope Central Eastern Europe will have a bright future also in this sphere. Thank you so much. Bye. Thank you very much.